Keep spawning culture. I guess I got to add myself to the stage, don't I? We're live. Oh, Samantha's really okay?
Hi.
I cannot get. There we go. I like to watch this on my phone to make sure that way I get to see how the stream is going, and it was giving me some trouble.
I need a link, don't I?
For what?
Since we'll be sharing our screen.
Oh, yeah, yep.
And I'll need my headphones, don't I?
You will. Go get your headphones.
Woo! I'm sorry.
Yeah, guys, she is just holding this show up. There's your link, baby. Alrighty. Well, guys, welcome to the MushRune Cast, episode 17. This is a very special cast. One of my favorite people is supposed to be guest starring with us, so I'm really excited about that. You guys probably know who Alan is. If you haven't, you can look him up. We'll introduce him, of course, before he jumps on here, but Alan is pretty much what I would call a taxonomy specialist. We'll see if he corrects me on this, but he literally scours the globe at this point. In particular, it seems like South America, Central America region, maybe Central more so than anything. But he is, I think, helped discover new species. He works pretty extensively with, the biodiversity surveys with the DNA and all kinds of stuff. So, yeah, really excited to have it here. As soon as I told him it'd be about 4:15, 4:30 before we had him on. So he'll pop up here soon. Let's see. Doug says, listening to Hysteria by Def Leppard while I wait for this podcast to begin. I'm pretty pumped. That's fantastic. I was listening to Hurt by Cody Jinks and then Purgatory by Atelians, however you say it. I don't know.
Andrew is jamming out.
It was two wildly different songs, but they both pumped me up. So I was totally doing that. And yes, Samantha was telling everyone I was pumping myself up. She, I'm pretty sure, was going to try to sneak some video for you guys of me bobbing my man bun around and stuff. I'm glad it didn't happen. Wow, stoked I took a break to eat and check YouTube. It's going to be epic. The two mushroom mentors I'd say I'd look up to the most. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. I am really happy to be included in that. I mean, I do not consider myself on the level anywhere close to it of Alan Rockefeller. So the man is an obsessive. So it's really an honor to be included on that same shelf. Frondosa Grandiosa. I always love your name. Woohoo! Here we go. Loving the weekly scheduled show. Sounds like a spell, or Griffola Frondosa.
It doesn't it?
Drop the beat, Moss Man. Let's start this party. Let's do this, folks. Let's do this. Those Cherokee guys, they always used to say "Studis," and anytime they were going somewhere, "Skodin."
Let's go in.
As in, let's go then, but Skodin. And then we watched Res Dogs, and apparently they.
It's a thing.
Aw, David Lynch. No, I like David Lynch. Did he die recently? Like now?
Sad day.
That is a sad day. Old Twin Peaks was a good show. Creepy, but a good show. What's up, Joe? We got Mary Jo Smiley here with us. I'm happy to be here. I'm happy to have you here. Michael Nerd, what's up, Mushroom Family? Cool to see Alan as a guest. Yeah, absolutely. We got some heavy hitters coming up, guys. I was surprised when I asked people, and they're like, yeah, let's do this. I was like, really? You want to be on my podcast? Little old me? Like, I'm so excited. We got Ryan Paul Gates coming up soon. He and I just have to figure out what day he's going to do, because he has a like clients that he sees specifically on Thursdays at this time every week. So in order to have him live, we'll either have to do a intro. I mean, like an intro, a pre videoed, pre-recorded. There we go, pre-recorded interview with him that I then just show on the live stream, or we'll have to do it on a different day. Honestly, I think the live interaction with someone like Ryan and Alan is so important that it would probably be better for us to reschedule if he can't. Simply because the ability to ask somebody questions live is just too good. I mean, this is literally the chance to ask somebody questions who you would have to pay money to typically ask questions. Or they're so busy that if you ask them a free question, they can't really get to you. So it's a good way to get someone cornered.
Well, and we kind of know in many ways how you can get a bit overwhelmed between phone calls and orders and everything that you're prioritizing and kind of all at once. And it's someone that can come on, answer these questions, and then it be recorded for you guys later to watch, even if it's not on Thursday. You can still watch it on Thursday just like it would be normal. But yeah, I think it's great.
It's good.
I was looking for another word.
It's good.
Nothing popped in.
It's good. Hey, it looks like we actually have Alan with us too. We got him in the back there. Let me just shoot him a message. All right, so Dustin, I'm doing really well. Actually, I'm doing really, really well. We are. I'm recovering very quickly now. The recovery was so slow. I felt like it was so slow, and then all of a sudden now I'm making leaps and bounds. Which tomorrow is cardio day, so Charles is going to come over and we're going to do swings, and I'm going to hate my life for about 30 minutes. But
you're gonna love it.
Well, thankfully the sauna, like this cold air, getting out there and doing swings in the cold air is really hard on my lungs right now. But I do feel like after I do that and then get in the sauna for about 20, 30 minutes and then get out, or the steam room, my recovery is going faster with the stress. So we'll see how it goes. PF Hattrick says, "Hey Samantha, move my monitor out of the bottom right corner. It's threatening to block your beautiful face."
I'm halfway afraid to.
Nah, he's not going to mind if you move it. Go move it.
No, not that. I'm going to create chaos in some form or another.
Oh. You might have to stand up and go over there. Also, I hear you talking about me. I was indeed talking about you. You came on right when I was talking about you. That's Charles. He's the one who regularly makes my life better by making my life worse. Maybe that's an unfair way of putting it. That seems to be out of the way. Yeah. What's up, Devin? What's up, David? Michael. Man, we're getting all kinds of people coming in here. Buddy Mush King and Mush Queen. I will never, ever take the crown of Mush King or Mush Queen. I'm not the prince of mushrooms. I'm not the king of mushrooms. I don't want it. I don't want the crown. I like, what is it? Sturgill Simpson's, like, I'm the king of Turd Mountain. I can't actually say it. We're still in the first 10 minutes. But you can have the crown. Yes. Pumped, folks. Ooh, Michael Kiddos. All right, guys. So this is going to be you can be the Mush Princess. I see. I didn't say princess, did I? I don't even know. Not even Duke. I'll take the Duke, maybe. I don't really like. I'm a true Scots-Irishman. In this sense, I bow to no. Clan. I bow. It's right, Mossy Creek Clan, the Mossy Clan. I bow to no man, and I want no man to bow to me. So, not even Duke. What's up, folks? All right, so Mush Reaver, that's right, the Mush Reavers. Well, I'm just trying to build up a little bit of time, so we get the crowd coming in. We get past the 10 minutes. Once we're past the 10-minute phase, we can talk about anything. So we'll bring Alan on here in just a minute or two. The Marquis of Mush, even though it's French royalty. Whatever. I've got some Norman blood in me too. We can do some French. I'm going very loose script. I'm just, like as I said, buying time for us to be able to talk about whatever we want to talk about without getting the stream shut down. Samantha, have you been able to get your link to work?
Yes.
Oh, I see that. Yep. You are. Look at that. Oh, I can hear myself go through that. Can you mute your mic? You see how to do it there?
Got it.
All right, I'm going to try this again. All right, I'm going to add Samantha. There she is. Speak, Samantha.
Hello.
Awesome. There's no echoes. I'm going to, let's see. Alan, I can see you. I don't know if you can see me, but you ready to jump on? Awesome. Cool. Well, guys, without much further ado, let me go ahead and bring Alan on here. And here we go. Alan Rockefeller, how you doing?
Hi, I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely, Alan. Are you kidding me? It's an honor, man. Every time I get to talk to you. I did a little bit of an introduction for you. I don't know if you heard any of it, but if you could introduce yourself a little bit, I'd appreciate that.
Yeah, I'm Alan Rockefeller, and I'm a mycologist. I've been looking at mushrooms for about 20 years, and I currently live in the East Bay of California. And I'm really interested in mushroom identification. And so that's a lot of DNA barcoding and microscopy. And kind of the point of all of that is so I can walk through the woods and know what all of the mushrooms are that I see.
I like that. In my introduction, I called you a taxonomist specialist. Would that be accurate?
Yeah, that sounds good. I like taxonomy.
There we go. I didn't know. So is the DNA barcoding part of taxonomy, or is taxonomy mainly physical characteristics?
The DNA barcoding really helps figure out the taxonomy.
Excellent. Okay. Well, I know. So I'm most familiar with you. I mean, I've seen you travel to Mexico, and I know you have traveled already to Ecuador a couple of times, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And I know that we're going to talk about some of the upcoming trips you've got going here, but I think I was first introduced to a lot of your work whenever, what was it? You had found some, like, I think it was psilocybin alani. Am I saying that right?
I think I call it Alenii, but
okay.
Yeah, there's no wrong way to say it.
Fair enough. And that was a fairly new species at that time, I think. And that's when you really popped up on my radar, maybe a little bit before then. But then after that, I've been kind of following your work as much as I can. Are you one of the owners of Mycena Media?
Yeah, so Mycena Media is a small company, and we have trips where we take people to foreign countries and look for mushrooms, and also like you can buy prints of the photos that I made, like printed on metal, and clothing with photos of the mushrooms that I've taken.
You have it printed on metal. That's pretty cool. I'm going to have to pick one of those up then.
Yeah, I think it's a lot better than paper because you don't need a frame, and they're a lot less expensive just to get them printed on metal than like printing them on paper and then getting them professionally framed. And they look way better that way too.
That works, man. How big of prints do you guys do on metal?
We can do any size, but I think by default it's like 9 by 12, and then there's maybe one larger size on there.
Okay. Yeah, your photography work is something else that really impressed me early on, because you're taking these like amazing macroscopic shots and then slicing them up, or I guess you're taking them in slices and then using a photo stacking program to put those together.
Yeah, exactly. I've been taking pictures of photos since about 2005, but I was never really happy with how the photos turned out until I started photo stacking. And that was about 2020.
Okay.
But, it takes a little bit more time than a cell phone, but, compared to how long it takes to travel out there and find the mushrooms and everything, the photography part is not really very much time.
Right. Yeah. Now, do you do, like when you're doing that, do you do manual focusing, or do you have some sort of rig that does an autofocus? Like I'm familiar with, I think it's called Arsenal. And it's like a little AI module that plugs into your camera, and that'll do a focus stack. You use something like that, or?
I've never tried that specific thing. What I'll usually do is do autofocus on the mushroom, and then if I grab the lens and rotate the focus ring, then it kind of adjusts it manually. So just manually pull the focus back until everything in the frame is in focus. So that includes like the back, the foreground and everything. And then I'll open up the aperture all the way, turn the ISO down all the way, and usually turn on a couple LED lights. So I have about 90% natural light and then about 10% of the light coming from LED lights. Okay. And then I'll tell the camera to take about 60 pictures, sometimes as many as 200. But if it's a really big mushroom, then something more like 5 or 8 is enough. But tiny mushrooms, you use a whole lot more pictures because you're a lot closer to them. Anyways, it'll take it'll take a whole lot of pictures, and each picture is a little slice of the final image. And because I open the aperture up all the way, the slices are really thin, and then the background is really blurry. So once I have all those pictures, I'll load them into Lightroom so I can choose which ones I want. And then the ones I want to include, I'll load that into Helicon, and it combines all of those pictures. It takes the sharp parts of each picture and puts that in the final image, and I'll save that, load that into Photoshop, and adjust the colors and the levels in Photoshop until it looks like it did in the field, and then I'm done. So, the whole process takes 5 or 10 minutes, but for a photo that's really just perfect and really sharp, it's totally worth it.
Oh, absolutely. When you've sold some of yours, right? Like I know that I saw some in Fungi magazine. I don't know if you sold that or not, but don't you have some in like some textbooks as well?
Yeah, there's a bunch of people that have used them, and if people want to buy my photos, they can. But also, my photos are all released under a free license, which means anybody can use them for anything forever. So if people just want to take my pictures and put them in their books, they don't need my permission. But I always let them if they ask me as well. But that way I get to see my pictures all over the place. Sometimes I'll be like, reading the newspaper or watching TV, and I'll see one of my pictures because they'll get it off of Wikipedia or something.
That's crazy. Like, okay, so maybe, and this is, tell me if this is too much, asking too much, but I don't. So you do that for free, and don't you manage like a hacker lab or something like that, like a open source kind of lab?
So that is Counterculture Labs, and it's a biohacker space in Oakland, and it's sort of like a science club that has a big lab, and people can pay a few bucks a month and get access to the lab, and then they have all sorts of chemicals and PCR machines and flow hoods and just all sorts of lab equipment. So it's
that's what I'm trying to figure out. I was like, what is your day job? How are you getting paid for all this stuff?
Oh, I don't have a day job. I don't nearly have enough time for that. So most of my income is from public speaking. Just giving talks at all the different events. I'm usually at a different event just about every weekend.
Okay, and we saw each other. Was it not last Atlanta, or not last Georgia Mushroom Festival, but the one before? We went to walk with you. Yeah,
that was awesome. By the way.
Oh yeah, I actually I went for 2 different things, two different. And one of them was your DNA workshop, and when I got there, they had rescheduled stuff, so I missed yours because I think I was just too late or something. But we did get to go on the night walk with you to see the fluorescent mushrooms and things like that. And my kids, like, we bought those fluorescent lights off you guys, and man, my kids still use those things all the time.
Yeah, those things are great. Yesterday I took them on the beach, and I was seeing like a whole bunch of uranium glass and all sorts of crazy fluorescent glass on the beach.
That's a great idea. For the beach trip, we need to take the fluorescent lights with us for that. We try to go about once a year to the beach, and I did not think about that at all, about how we could use that for the nightlight. Do you see? Is there life forms on the beach that are going to be fluorescent?
We were kind of up a little further away from the water. I didn't notice any fluorescent lights, but I'm pretty sure if you go to part of the beach that has tide pools, then yeah, some of those stuff really light up. Some of the nudibranchs and anemones and things. I'd really like to do some fluorescent photography with stuff in the tide pools at really low tide. So we were just kind of up looking at the sea glass and stuff like that. And some of it really lights up, the uranium glass, and some of it glows orange. I think it's cadmium or something.
Oh, wow. Wait, so what is I mean, it's just uranium glass is just bits of uranium, or
it's they used to put a whole bunch of uranium oxide in glass to color it, and they started doing it a really long time ago, a couple hundred years ago, and that's before they had black lights, so they didn't realize it's fluorescent. But then when people started using black lights, they're just like, wow, this stuff really lights up.
Golly. Go ahead.
Have you ever experimented with some of the fluorescent inks that you can print with on your photographs? Because how cool would that be to have your print off your photographs and then turn off the light
have it
and
where
have
it can fluoresce.
And you can see it fluoresce right there in your room or living room or whatever, and it would kind of remind you of when you went on the night walk or whatnot, and it'd be awesome.
Yeah, there's a guy in Southern California, and he prints things really large. Like if somebody wants something printed on their building or a truck or something, he does, really big things. And so he printed a bunch of stuff for me. And so some of these things, they're like 10 feet by 10 feet, and they are printed with fluorescent inks.
That's super
And
That's
cool.
so
awesome.
we had those printed for a psychedelic convergence party that we did last year in Oregon. And so we hung them up in the trees, and we had really bright ultraviolet lights shining up on them. And yeah, they looked really cool.
That was beautiful.
That's super cool. So let's see, someone, oh, hold on. Someone said this guy is not human. He's a living fungus. So love you in Leketch. I don't know what that means, but and someone asked if you're planning fungal plasmid sequencing. I don't know what that means.
Well, plasma is like a circular piece of DNA, and I've never planned anything like that. Usually when people are sequencing plasmids, they're trying to do genetic modifications. So, I do a lot of stuff with DNA, but I think the mushrooms are just fine as they are. So I've never really wanted to edit the DNA and reprogram them to do something else. So I don't think plasmids are too applicable for what I'm interested in, because the DNA that I'm looking at is just in the mushroom naturally in long strands. But plasmids are certainly easy to sequence. I know GeneWiz has like a plasmid sequencing service. You just give them their plasmids and they give you the data back. You certainly can.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, I didn't know anything about that. Yeah, he went on further to say native fungal plasmids, but I don't know if that means anything.
I don't know anything about native fungal plasmids. When I'm sequencing stuff, I'm mostly looking at the barcode genes. So fungi are maybe 50 million base pairs long, and I'm looking at about 600 of those, because those are the genes that are used for phylogeny and taxonomy. But you can sequence all 50 million. And I'm part of a project called the Entheome Project, and our goal is to do full genome sequencing on all of the psychoactive organisms, starting with the fungi. And we just released a paper a couple weeks ago that had high-quality genomes for a bunch of different mushrooms. So we take this, take a mushroom, extract the DNA in a really high-quality DNA extraction, and then sequence the whole genome with both nanopore and with Illumina, and then stitch all that data together. And so it allows us to get a really high quality assembly, and you can decode the DNA, see exactly what it's doing, see how it makes psilocybin and everything else that it does too. And so, that kind of stuff is pretty expensive. It costs a couple $1,000s per organism.
Good Lord.
To do that. So it's mostly crowdfunded. But we got quite a few of them online, and we're planning for a whole bunch more this year. And so it's pretty cool to be able to dig into the psilocybin gene cluster and see exactly how each of these species produces psilocybin. And it turns out they're all, they're not all the same.
That's what I was going to ask, is if they had if there were different ways to accomplish the same goal, I guess.
Yeah, well, it's kind of like the same fragments of DNA, but they'll have different numbers of copies of them or have them in different orders. So you can kind of see, just in the different species, they're definitely different, and that's what gives you some of the chemical differences in the alkaloids between the different species.
Okay, dang, it's so cool. Okay, so if we can do the barcoding, why is it so? I've looked into this a little bit. I've talked to a few geneticists, and they were talking about how trying to determine parentage. Like if I want to breed mushrooms together and I'm unsure of the parentage, why is parentage so hard to figure out? You know, if I mean,
so the barcoding gives you, just a small amount of data, and it's like species level resolution, so you can figure out the species about 98% of the time. But both parents would have the same barcode, so that's not going to help you there.
Gotcha.
So I think full genome sequencing could definitely do that, but full genome sequencing can get pretty expensive, and then you'd have to sequence, not just one sequence, but several sequences, so you have something to compare with.
Right.
And it's a huge amount of data. So it seems like, it may or may not be worth it, to throw thousands of dollars at a project to figure out parentage.
Right. I mean, yeah, if you got a good strain, you got a good strain. It doesn't necessarily mean you don't necessarily need to know who the parents were, I guess. It just doesn't make the same economic sense. But okay. And then that kind of segues me into a topic I wanted to hit while I had you here, which was, why is Hericium kind of such a taxonomic nightmare?
Well, nobody's really looked at the taxonomy of Hericium recently. And so, there's a few names that we use, but if you look at the DNA barcode data, it doesn't really correspond to the names very well.
Mm-hmm.
And all the sequences definitely form into clades if you put them into phylogenetic trees. So we got a bunch of species of Hericium around, but what to call them is a difficult question. One reason it's difficult is because the holotypes haven't been sequenced. So we have these names, but we're not really sure what these names refer to. And then we have a whole bunch more species than we have names. And the other question is, like, how are these species different? And are these different clades where we can see that they're different in the DNA sequence? Are they different enough that they really deserve to be called by a different name?
Right.
Or should we just be expanding our concept of some of these species to include more clades and and just encompass more things? And that really depends on if you can find differences. I like Dr. Boss's species concept, which is where you have 3 unrelated differences. And if you can find 3 unrelated differences between 2 organisms, then they're different enough to deserve a different name, and then you would call it a different species. Okay. Whereas if there are less differences, maybe it would just be a subspecies or a variety. But Hericium has not been studied recently, and there's not a lot of multi-gene sequencing. So you can definitely use ITS to figure out some stuff, but sometimes it's good to look at some additional genes, which are a little bit harder to sequence, and they're separate PCR reactions. So it takes a little bit more work, but still definitely possible to do in a home lab. So somebody needs to look into that with a whole bunch of different collections and see if those trends that we're seeing in the ITS continue to be, good, valid trends when we're looking at the other genes. And also chemical analysis would be really interesting of them too. So kind of put the DNA sequence together with the chemistry and see if certain clades or certain species have more alkaloids that might be medicinal than others. And the alkaloid analysis is just starting, but the only reference standard that is commonly available is aresinine A. And that is one of the nerve growth factors chemicals, but there's a bunch of different chemicals, and nobody really knows which of those chemicals are best, for nerve growth, and which species have the most of it. And then once you have a good species, it's a lot of different strains. So there's definitely a lot of research, and I suspect some people have done a lot of this research, but they're at corporations, and so they didn't release the results of their studies. They just kind of use it internally. But I think, just like psilocybin and cannabis has been bred recently for extreme potency, that Hericium could be too, and that would be a good thing to do.
Well, that's something I've wondered about. I can't say I don't have the testing facilities to really do anything like that, but I have crossed a few different Hericiums. And like, for instance, right now I've got a strain that is being tested, but what did Dr. Oman call it when he came in? The terpenes? Am I using that word correctly? Okay,
Yeah,
the terpene. Right. count. He said it's got to be incredibly high. He took it to test over at North Carolina's A&T, but the fruit is so sticky. It's just like weeping this, I assume, sugary liquid, because it'll leave a residue on your gloves that is really tacky. And when we make extracts of it, the extracts are way darker, different color. It's I don't know. It's just it's a very obvious like visual difference and physical difference. But that was crossing what was labeled as a Hericium americanum and a Hericium erinaceus. So I don't know that for sure that those were what they are labeled to be. And I also have no idea, using the methods that I had, I'm pretty sure that I had a cross between the two strains, but I have no idea, if they were actually the two different species they were supposed to be.
Probably not. I don't think anybody really knows what Hericium americanum or Hericium erinaceus is, so it's not possible to apply those names with certainty. We have to sequence the holotype of Hericium americanum and kind of decide what Hericium americanum is, and then we could certainly sequence yours and say it's the same as these other collections. But applying a scientific name just isn't going to be possible.
Right. And that's why it made me wonder, because I've done this a few times where I'm pretty sure I got a cross between what was labeled as two species, but then I'm sitting there going, well, we already know that the taxonomic situation isn't exactly clear cut. So are people truly labeling these species as what they are? Will Hericium actually hybridize between the quote unquote species? Because as you said, we actually do we even really understand the nature of speciation here? And are these just different variants within the same species? Kind of like, I guess, Columbinus is just a variant of Austriatus. And will interbreed with the other Austriatuses. Good.
One thing about erinaceus is it's from Europe. So the ones collected in this country are different and don't have names. And then there's a few things going under the name Americanum. But the even weirder thing about Hericium is that if you download all the sequences, build a phylogenetic tree, these different names are all popping up in the different clades, and the morphologies seem to be kind of interspersed. So it's sort of like it's hard to tell if you can just look at it and really tell much about what species it is.
Right.
But about the one that you were growing with all those terpenes, that's super interesting. And, the nerve growth factors in Hericium are terpene-type molecules. So it's certainly possible that you have something that's really useful. But it's also possible that it's making molecules that are not too useful. And it's actually really hard to tell.
Right.
You kind of like they do the test for the nerve growth factor. They kind of put some neurons in petri dishes and then put a little Hericium extract on it, and they can see if it grows there. But most things that are effective in petri dishes are not effective in humans.
Right. In particular, isn't it because it has to go through the digestive system in part, like to get there.
So. And the blood-brain barrier, if it's doing something in your brain.
Right.
And so, it has to do both of those things, which are pretty big hurdles. So usually, like in drug discovery, they say, maybe 10 to 20% of things that work in petri dishes are actually effective in humans. But a lot of people don't understand that. So a lot of like supplement companies or wellness influencers, they'll see these petri dish studies and they'll be like, oh, wow, this thing is super helpful, but then later a clinical trial come along and find that it does nothing, and that's super common. I don't think that's going to happen with Hericium. There's a lot of anecdotal evidence out there that Hericium is really good for people, but there is very little clinical data. In fact, if you're only looking at good studies, like clinical trials with large sample sizes, there's no clinical data.
Right.
And
the only two that I saw recently that came out that I would consider fairly decent, I think came out in 2021, 2022, which was like a mouse study and a rat study, which are not a one-to-one human study. It's not they saw, well, I think one of them was that you had the erinacine, you had the mix of hericinones, and then you had the control group, and they found that the erinacine didn't seem to increase some cognitive performance. Oh, looks like we lost Alan somehow.
Oh no!
Oh no! Crap! Well, I'll tell you guys for the study real quick, and hopefully we'll get him back. But the what they found was that the arenacine increased a little bit, but the Hericium mix had the greatest performance there. So let's see. There he is. He's back. Okay, cool. Okay, I don't know if you just heard what I said there, or when we got you back at, but what I was saying is that
most of it. I tried to check the chat and I didn't do a good job, so I had to reconnect.
No worries.
But
aha.
But yeah, I mean, you really need a clinical trial with a sample size of like more than 100 to say anything with certainty. And so these different aranacines, they can be separated with flash chromatography. So you can take a Hericium extract and run it through a silica gel column. And that's something that's really easy to do at home. What's not as easy to do at home is to figure out what you have coming out the other side of the column, because you need kind of like the same kind of detector you have in an HPLC machine. But, those things are not huge. You could definitely set something up in your kitchen to separate the different, molecules in mushrooms, and especially the different terpenes in Hericium. But what really needs to be done is to do like clinical trials that test these different arecinines and hericinones separately, and see which ones are actually good for people.
Yeah,
maybe all of them are. Maybe it's just one or two.
Yeah, I've just been taking the shotgun approach, where when I make my extract, I make it with a combination of different hericiums, and that's as far as I can tell, that's the best method to go with for now when we know so little. I mean, I was looking at the ganodernic acid testing, and the company was proud to tell me that, yes, they were currently only testing for ganodernic acid A, but they had new test protocols for 3 new ones coming on there. And I said, oh, cool, how many acids are there? And they're like, I don't know, 400 and something different ganodernic acids. So I was like, oh, so we really don't know anything about it.
Yeah, well, like testing for 1 molecule is infinitely better than testing for 0 molecules.
Right.
And, if you're only testing for 4 ganodermic acids, but you're testing for the 4 most common ones in the mushroom, then you're really doing pretty well. But if you're testing for 4 obscure ones, then you're not testing for anything. The testing is really difficult, and the equipment to do the testing is, $20,000 on the low end for an HPLC. But what I'd really like for my living room, is an LCMS, and that's about $250,000, and then it's about $10,000 per month to keep it running. So, these the equipment to really dig into this is not cheap. And even equipment like that doesn't just tell you the answer. Right. It kind of tells you which chemicals are there and helps you, maybe design a study that can figure out the answer. But a lot of these questions will definitely not be answered in our lifetimes, for a lot of reasons. They're just difficult questions, and maybe there's not the funding to do it. And that sort of thing.
Yeah. But I will say, when I don't know if you know this, but when I first went into school, I was going for mycology. I wanted to study ants, and particularly the attine ants. And then, so the fungus farmers. And then my professor had advised me, she's like, look, you really don't want to do this. And I was like, why? And she's like, there's like 8 jobs in the United States that are going to pay you to study ants, and then the rest of them are going to pay you to study out how to kill them. So, she's like, if you love ants and you don't want to spend all your time killing them, you should find something else. And then we were doing sea fern experiments. And so we were growing those out in plates, and they were contaminated one of mine was contaminated with mold. And I saw it under the microscope, and I got to see a hyphal tip swell and burst. And I don't know what it was. It was like filled with this black fluid and then shot it off. And to this day, I don't know what it was, but I got so excited about it, and I turned to my teacher, and I was like, professor, I was like, I want to study mycology. And she's like, that is great, because we know so little. You could study it for the rest of your life, and you will barely scratch the surface of what we know. You're still not going to ever know, in our lifetimes, we're still not going to even figure out what we don't know about fungus yet. So it's funny that you say that, because it seems like we're not going to have a lot of these answers.
Yeah, for sure. But like I said, the Hericium A is one where the reference standard is available. And so all you need is an HPLC and a Hericium A reference standard to test for that one. So a bunch of the psilocybin testing laboratories are now testing for that. So like people like Jordan Jacobs in Portland, you can send him a sample of lion's mane. I think he charges about $75 or something, and he can tell you exactly how much of that's in there. And we ran some when I was visiting his lab a few months back, and we saw the peak for Hericium A, and then you can see some nearby peaks, so you can see some of the other Hericians in there and like related molecules. So you can definitely get some kind of visibility into what's going on. Yeah. And I guess my main question is like, how medicinal is Hericium A? And would it be worthwhile to do a breeding program where you're trying to raise the level of Hericium A, or is this maybe some inactive one? And if you raise the level of that one, maybe you're lowering the level of the active ones. Most likely, it's worth paying attention to, and it's good. But without being tested in isolation, it's really hard to tell.
I think if nothing else, it might be interesting to breed for that, to do a selective breeding program for that, whether or not we know enough about it to really apply that, but simply to build out the standard for selective breeding of the Hericiums. I mean, I've ran into quite a few hurdles kind of messing with mine, and once you get clean spore prints, it's easier. But you certainly, a cap, you can't just set it on aluminum foil with like you can a mushroom cap and get the cleanest of prints a lot of times. But I don't know, just to develop some standards for like, okay, here's how we push this in this direction. Now that we've got these out, as we figure out what is useful, we can just follow those same guidelines to hit these. And
yeah, for sure. And then also, when you're testing for Hericium A, you see the nearby peaks, and that's the other Hericinones and Hericianines that are closely, have a similar molecular weight and go through the column in a similar rate. So those are going to be the other ones there. So just because you don't have a reference standard for the other ones doesn't mean you can't see them. So you could kind of like pay attention to these other ones and do your breeding in such a way that it raises the total value of all of the similar molecules. And the equipment to do that's relatively inexpensive. About $20,000 used for an HPLC.
Which doesn't sound all that cheap, but for a lot of equipment, it absolutely is. Yeah,
I mean, really cheap compared to mass spec.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, heck, I was just looking at a cryogenic storage system because nowadays with the bioprospecting, the breeding, I've got so many strains, and I was like, it would be nice to be able to just shelve them for a while instead of having to pull them out of the fridge and re-slant them. But I was looking at it and I was like, wow, that ain't cheap either. The cryogenic systems are really, really not cheap. So
yeah, maybe the best way to do that is just have a really big doer and just have liquid nitrogen delivered like once a month or something.
That's a good point. I was kind of looking into that because I was looking at even Vivor sells the specimen tanks, the what do you call it, the Duor, for that, and I was like, oh, I was wondering how feasible that was. How expensive would it be for me to just get liquid nitrogen delivered and just cap it off and keep it that way instead of having the system, the whole system. Real quick, I would just like to, I'm seeing a lot of questions show up on Instagram. Guys, for the Instagram stream, just so you know, I have to manually click over to that. So if you'll go over to YouTube or X, we are streaming to both of those. And those both pop up in the same chat. So it's a lot easier for me to feed questions to Alan from that if you go to one of those. So I hate to have you come up on Instagram and then just funnel you over to YouTube. And I see people asking if I can upload this discussion to YouTube afterwards. It will automatically upload as soon as the stream's over. So for anyone who wants to go back and study this, they can. But also if you want to be able to have more direct access instead of just whenever I remember to check Instagram, just come on over to YouTube, come over to X, watch us on there because you'll be able to talk directly to us. Sorry about that, Alan. Just wanted to make sure I got people a fair chance to be able to get at you. We have a couple of questions. Someone's asking, what's up with the Naturalensis name change? I don't know anything about this. I don't work much in the psilocybin world, so maybe you can even inform me a little bit about this. What is Naturalensis in the first place?
That's a good question. So psilocybin naturalensis is a mushroom that was discovered in Africa. And it was, let's see, look at this really quick. So it was discovered in 1995 in South Africa, the Natal region. And it's kind of this cube-like thing, but a little bit different. And then what happened is about 11 years ago, somebody took a mushroom that they thought was probably Natalensis, sent it to someone in Florida, and the person in Florida grew it and found that it seemed to be a little different than cubensis. Makes really rhizomorphic mycelium on agar, and a lot of people say the effects are better than cubensis. So figured it must be Natalensis, and it started getting distributed around under the name Natal Super Strength, or NSS. And after a few years, I got a hold of some of them, and I sequenced the DNA, and it didn't match anything in GenBank, including cubensis. So I figured, okay, cool, this must be Natalensis because it came from Africa and it's not a cube. But then more recently, just in the past year, Alexander Bradshaw got a hold of the holotype collection of Natalensis, and he sequenced it. And it turns out it's a different thing. It's not this thing that's been going around under the name NSS, and it's not cubensis. It's a third thing.
Okay.
So that means that the real Natalensis keeps the name, but what we have that we thought was Natalensis is going to be published as Psilocybe ocratiocentrata. And there's a preprint out about that you can read. And it's just a preprint. It's not validly published yet, so the name's not official. They could still change it. But if things go like they planned, then what we're calling NSS or Natalensis will be ocratiocentrata, talking about the ochre cap center.
So it's not even going to stay in the same genus. It's moving genus.
It's going to be, it's all in Psilocybe. They're all really closely related to Psilocybe cubensis.
Roger that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
But you can tell the difference based on the spore morphology. And, to lesser extent, physical, like macromorphological features that you can see. And by DNA. And the chemistry is probably different too, since people are noticing different effects.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's definitely in the cubensis group. It turns out in America, the cubensis group is pretty small, just one species, Psilocybe cubensis, named after Cuba. But these things evolved in Asia or Africa. And if you go over to Asia or Africa, you have a whole bunch of species that look very similar and differ just a little bit in spore morphology, chemistry. And so they're all pretty closely related. They're in the same clades, so they can crossbreed occasionally. And so not everything in that group can crossbreed, but some of them can, some of them can't. The ones, if you make a phylogenetic tree, the ones that are closer on the phylogenetic tree tend to crossbreed. The ones that are just a little bit further apart tend not to crossbreed. Yeah. I think Julian Matucci has been doing all of the work on this to figure out which ones can cross or not.
That's
Julian is of Imperial.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay, I couldn't remember the name.
Phylogenetic tree, and then do the actual breeding studies and mark up the phylogenetic tree. With the results of which ones actually crossed. And he's been doing really cool stuff because he's noticed that he's made hundreds of crosses now, and he notices that if you have the same species but from different parts of the world and you cross them, they will be a lot more vigorous. They'll grow in agar faster, they'll fruit better, that sort of thing. And so he's doing really cool stuff with that.
That would be the hybrid vigor we hear about in plants and other things?
Yeah, he gathered a bunch of data. Seems like it's a real thing.
Okay, excellent. We had also someone asked about olive oil fungus. Do you know anything about this?
No, I don't know anything about olive oil fungus.
I don't either. They gave the name Phoma multirostrata, but I don't know anything about it. That's definitely out of my wheelhouse. I mean, I'm a cultivator. I guess I'm more of where the rubber hits the road on that kind of stuff. But someone wanted to know if you could recommend a place to test in Europe. They're in Belgium.
Yeah, I don't know of anyone in Europe that's doing the testing. So probably the best thing to do is to send it to the United States. And I think sending small amounts of like psilocybin mushrooms to the United States is typically not a problem because the male police are typically looking for drug dealers and stuff, and they're catching large shipments, pounds and pounds and stuff. People send small amounts of samples around all the time, and never heard of anyone having trouble with it. So,
do you ever get in trouble for carrying because I know you carry a collection occasionally. I mean, do you have a problem with that, like at any point?
Yeah, I always have lots and lots of mushrooms with me. And, when I'm in my car, I usually have hundreds of bags of mushrooms. And I've been arrested twice for that.
Oh, God.
And, yeah. And
one time was in my state, wasn't it? I think I remember this.
Could have been. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. Okay. Well, I'm sorry for that.
Both times it did not go well for the police.
Good. I mean, it's obvious you're not like if you're carrying around a bunch of little samples, it's obvious that it's not a drug dealing mission, I assume.
Yeah, some of it just kind of depends on how pissed off they are at you, or just how pissed off they are in general.
Yeah.
Some cops are trying to do good for the world and just arrest people that are actually causing problems. And then other cops will just, get whoever they can to get their numbers up. And you never know what you're going to run into out there.
It's true. I mean, so I was not very tattooed back then, but I have a morel right there. And as the first tattoo I ever got, it was like the first time I sold mushrooms, I took those and bought a tattoo just as a commemoration. And I was driving to market one day, and I handed the cop my driver's license like that, and he saw the mushroom. He says, "Is that a mushroom tattoo?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm a mushroom farmer. I'm going to market. I've got a bunch of mushrooms in the back." And he made me sit there while he took every box out and just tossed it on the side of the road there, And then when he was done, he's like, "Well, you can go." And I was like, "Are you not going to help me load this stuff back up?" And he's like, No, that's your stuff, not mine." And I was just like, wow, this guy is really making it a difficult situation that doesn't have to be. So that was when I first started getting into mushrooms. There was almost no one growing mushrooms around here back then. Nobody really heard of it.
It's crazy that the war on drugs is still going on, but it certainly is. In some places a lot more than others. Where I live in California, you would really have to piss off the police to have them do something like that. But you just drive a little bit inland in some of the red parts of California, and they will really get you for whatever they can.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, gosh, Alan, my county was a dry county until maybe 5 years ago. So you couldn't even have alcohol in my county, hardly, especially on a Sunday. It was definitely could not do that. So I apologize. My ADD. I don't know if I actually took us off before you finished answering the testing in Belgium question. Did I take us off that before you finished answering?
I don't know of anyone doing testing in Europe, although a lot of universities certainly could, but whether they'll take samples from people, I've never heard of anyone in Europe being able to get their stuff tested locally.
What about DNA testing?
So the DNA testing, there's a place in Spain, and they are called AlvaLab. Those alvalab.es, and they charge about $25, $30 per sample, and you get the DNA results back in a couple weeks. So that's the DNA barcoding. It'll tell you what kind of species you have. I have a little DNA lab in my garage, and so if I do my own lab work, then I pay about $5 per sample to do the same sort of testing. But these days, a lot of people are doing nanopore sequencing. So nanopore sequencing gets the cost down to about 50 cents per sample. And then you're doing all of the sequencing at home. You're not outsourcing it to any other labs or anything. But the catch is you got to do 1,000 at a time. Or you don't have to do 1,000, but it costs the same amount to do 1,000 or one mushroom. So you might as well do 1,000 at a time.
That's what the Ohio Mushroom Biodiversity Lab, I think is what it's called. That's what they're doing, right?
Yeah. So there's, I think, 3 people in the United States that are doing nanopore sequencing right now. There's the Ohio Mushroom DNA Lab, and there's Hart Singer out in California with Fundus, and there's Stephen Russell in Indiana. And so, these 3 people are just taking 1,000 samples at a time, getting samples from a lot of different people and putting them into a run and getting all the sequence data. And that has really revolutionized our understanding of what species are out there. Just before this podcast, I was going through a bunch of Stephen Russell's data and validating it. And that's a pretty fun thing to do because I go into his database and find some results and then check them, see what they say, and then communicate the results to the people that find the mushrooms, put it up on iNaturalist. And so it's kind of cool because you're like the last mile of delivery guy that brings them their results.
Yeah, I don't know. I'll routinely see different people's names because I donate to the Ohio Mushroom Lab whenever I get a chance. And, of course, I put it on the iNaturalist. And so it's always exciting to me when I get that email, that email that says that somebody added some data to my listing. So, and I'll see 2 or 3 different names I see pretty regularly that have like approved the data. What did you call it?
A sequence validator. The people that look at the sequences and make sure the data is valid and give it to the person. But yeah, you'll always see the data come from Stephen Russell because that's the username that has the access to the API. So the sequences always come from MycoMap, no matter who sequenced it, and the sequence always gets added by Stephen Russell. But then you'll see like the actual person doing the work, and they're be the one like proposing the name and maybe commenting on it and that sort of thing. So yeah, it's always really exciting. It's always like Christmas morning when your sequence data comes back, because then you remember finding it, and then you can see what it is exactly and where else in the world it occurs, which observations are the same things, and a lot of the time it's a real surprise what it actually was, and you're like, no way, that has to be a mistake. And then you look up what it actually was, and you're like, actually, now that I look more closely, I can see it. And it's like you never would have figured that out if it wasn't for this little nudge, suggesting it. But once you see it, you can't unsee it. And then you're like, next time you find it, you don't have to sequence it again. You're just like, oh yeah, it's one of those.
I mean, that's the fun part, right? I mean, is the little discoveries along the way, and that's one of the reasons why I got into mushrooms in the first place. Is because I was like, man, even an uneducated person like myself can make some headway in this area because there's so much we don't know that I can still pop into it, and then it gets me to work with educated people like you. So
yeah, I mean, if you go out in the woods and pick 100 different mushrooms, probably 30 of them will not have names that we can figure out from the DNA barcode, and probably at least 15 or 20 of them will be new species that we find all the time, but the scientists haven't discovered them yet, don't have a name for it. But one thing that's really cool that's happening right now is the mycoblitz. So right now the winter mycoblitz is happening, and so any mushroom that's collected between January 10th and January 26th can be sent in to Stephen Russell for free DNA barcoding, up to 10 collections per person. So if you just go outside right now and pick some mushrooms, dry them, label them with the iNaturalist number, and throw them in the mail, they will get DNA sequenced, and then you'll have that sequence data on your iNaturalist observations. I am not hearing. I'm not hearing your voice at all, and I'm not sure if you can hear mine. But it looks like Andrew.
Can you hear me
now? Yep, you sound great.
Okay. Hooray! Well, Andrew's left me on my own, so I'm going to fulfill a curiosity of mine, which is what got you into all of this to begin with? Like, you said you've been at this for 20 years. That's a really long time.
Yeah, I think I started looking at mushrooms around 2001. I've always kind of been into nature, but it was kind of like when I would go out into nature, I was wondering if I was making a good use of my time, because there's like, it's beautiful out there and everything, but without like a real goal or something to do, it's like, oh, what am I doing? But once I started looking at the mushrooms and kind of seeing them a little bit more, I was, it made it much easier to be like, yeah, I should spend a whole lot of time outside, because if you have the goal of getting the best photo you can of every mushroom and figuring them what they all are, then that's like a really nice way to get outside and be in nature, and it makes the experience of going outside so much more enriching when you're really paying attention to all the stuff out there. And so that the more I see the mushrooms, the more interesting they get, and then the more I'm just out in nature, the more the more interesting everything else in nature gets too. So like last night, I was out there, and I had kind of a long lens, like a 600 millimeter lens, and I was taking pictures of birds, and I got some really awesome bird shots. So last night was like the first time in my life that I ever got really good pictures of birds. I don't think I'll ever get into birds, but they're kind of cool looking. But I think there's something like encoded in our DNA that makes us like nature, just because we evolved in nature. And so, it provides really nice contrasts from, the city, the concrete jungle, where everything is super artificial.
For sure. So were you raised in the city, or were you raised in a more rural setting, or?
Yeah, I grew up in Chicago. Okay. And so, it was very suburban where I grew up. And
I guess very different than the way I grew up. My nearest neighbors were, I don't know, 16th or 8th of a mile away or something like that. And we just roamed mountains. That's what we did all the time, was just roam the foothills and stuff. So, I mean, by the time I was little, they would just kick us out of the house, and my cousin and I would fill up like bags full of apples, go roam around the woods, and then get hungry, roast some apples around a fire, and then kick on and keep going. So I definitely got the nature really early. And then it sometimes surprises me that, when I'm talking to people and they're like, they just didn't have that kind of same upbringing, I guess. I just can't imagine a city upbringing. That's such a foreign concept to me, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine a rural upbringing. That sounds amazing.
It was indeed.
My dad always took me out into nature all the time, and so I was kind of like, when I was really young, I was like rock climbing when I was 3 years old, and camping out when I was 5, and just kind of always been in nature. Just kind of like went to the city to live, like that's where the house was, but I would go out into nature a lot.
That's when you come alive, huh? That's when you were out in the nature.
Yeah, I always really liked it, but I didn't really, really like it until I started studying stuff, trying to figure out what things are. So now, like, whenever I see a plant and I don't know what the plant is, I'll get the best pictures I can and put it up on iNaturalist. And, anything I see in nature that I don't know what it is, which is most stuff, I'll try to figure it out. And all of a sudden, it's like you have a mission out there, and you're learning and being really engaged, and it just makes nature so much more interesting.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and it makes traveling around so much more interesting, too, just like going to different places and having completely different environments, but everything's following the same natural rules that everything on life follows, but just coming to like a really different conclusion.
Yeah, that's I grew up and I realized, I guess later on in life, but a lot of these hunters and fishermen and stuff that I grew up around. My grandfather was a scientist, and he was an avid outdoorsman, but he was not a hunter or a fisher. So I did not learn unless I went with my neighbors. But as I got older, I started learning. A lot of these guys are basically amateur ecologists. Like I went out fishing with a buddy of mine. He's probably the best mushroom bioprospector I have that helps, donating to the Mycologium for us. And I was out fishing with him, and we're going out, and I saw this little stem sticking in the water, and it was just barely moving. He said, "Yeah, that's a carp feeding." And I was like, "Bullshit. There's no way he knows that's a carp feeding." And so we get on the boat, silently comes up on it, and there you go. You can see it plain as day. There was a carp literally sucking stuff off of it. And it was just like, I was like, how, from just that little wiggle, these guys who were like truly, like, I grew up in the outdoors, but these guys truly live the outdoors. They gain their sustenance from it. And none of them would trade it for any amount of money that you could offer them. So, the natural resources, the natural world, I don't know, man. It's just something, that's when I feel like I really come alive. I don't get out into it nearly as much as I should, but
yeah, for sure. I mean, there's nothing better than going to a place where there's been a lot of rain and there's mushrooms everywhere, and just looking for mushrooms all day. You just kind of feel so fulfilled at the end of the day. And, then you have to spend all night drying all the mushrooms and processing the photos and everything, but it's totally worth it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, we got we stopped doing like Christmas presents for our kids. I don't know, at some point when they were fairly young, we just realized that presents just continued to pile up and pile up. So what we started doing was Samantha and I decided we were going to focus on experiences. So we start doing stuff like going to the aquarium or whatever. A couple of years ago, we got kayaks as the Christmas present for the family. So we hit the lake like last year. Man, for one thing, lake mushroom hunting is so much more fun to me than mountain mushroom hunting. Like just being able to paddle around. There's literally just, spars sticking out of the water with mushrooms growing off of them, ready to pick that nobody else can get to but you. But they're beyond all that, like just that kind of experience. And I've really seen it like mean a lot more to the family. But it also like, that's one of the reasons why I started bioprospecting in the first place for, all the different, kinds of mushrooms that we grow. Was basically just as almost an excuse to get back out into nature. So speaking of nature, though, I know that you've got some trips coming up to Ecuador that you wanted to talk about. Why don't you tell me a little bit about that? Because I am so very, very, very interested in these Ecuador trips.
Yeah, so I've been going to Ecuador for about 5 years now. And one of the ways I make a living is just taking people mushroom hunting in foreign countries. And so we have a trip coming up in Ecuador, and we got actually 2 of them. The first one is February 1st to the February 10th, and the second one is the 12th to the 19th. And the first one is an adventure trip. And so what we did is we found all of our favorite experts on everything in nature and brought them all to Ecuador. And so we have my friend Joey, who makes the Crime Pays but Botany Doesn't videos. And he's going to come and teach us about all the plants out there. And Andy Better is an insect expert. So he's going to help us identify all the insects. And collaborating with Alex Bentley and Zane, and those guys are reptile experts. So they capture snakes for a living and milk the venom for research and study bats in the caves and do all sorts of stuff like that. So we basically got world-class experts on every field of, every domain of stuff that you see out in the rainforest there all together. And so if anyone wants to come along, it costs $2,500 for 10 days. And that includes like food and lodging and everything except the flight down there. But it should be a really cool group of people. And I think we got like 14 people signed up right now. So there's about 6 spots left, but that one is February 1st to the 10th. And then the other one is kind of a more relaxed, we call it the luxury foray, and it's at this kind of high-end eco resort in the Amazon that Furhat runs. And so Furhat is a mushroom identification expert from Turkey, and he started running this eco resort in Ecuador. And so we just go to his resort and look for mushrooms. There's many miles of trails on the property of his resort, and so really beautiful place to look for stuff. And so I'm going to be gone for most of the week of February and or most of the month of February. And those should be pretty cool trips.
That sounds like super cool trips. Like I told you, if I was a little bit more recovered in lungs and I felt like my business could survive me leaving for a little bit, I would be down there. So maybe, I don't know, when's your next set of trips? Do you have the next set planned, or is it a yearly thing?
Next ones that have not been planned yet. We don't usually plan them too far in advance because we want to make sure the mushroom season is good and that, it's not just going to be like a drought or something like that. But it'll probably be in the fall. Probably take a bunch of people to Colombia. And then the spring, we usually do Ecuador. So we did a similar trip to Colombia near Medellin this November, and that was really cool. We found so many good mushrooms, and the people in Colombia were so nice. And also, the people that come in these trips are not really random people. They're just people that want to travel internationally to look for mushrooms, and so they're all super cool people.
Sounds like it.
I think the website that we list this stuff on is called Mycena, so it's mycena.llc, and there's a mailing list on there. So if people want to find out about trips that they that are coming up,
You said it was Mycena LLC?
Yep, Mycena.llc. We just send out like, I don't know, maximum like 3-4 emails per year, so we won't spam you or anything. But that's where we announce the trips. Or also, if people follow me on Facebook or Instagram or LinkedIn or X or Blue Sky or I don't know, I'll probably add a few other ones too.
And you're on everything.
Yeah, I figure if I'm going to travel out there and take good pictures and then write up a post and everything, I might as well copy and paste it on every single platform.
You're better at that than I am then, because I'm still like, oh man, I have a hard time posting every day on the social media I've got.
Yeah, no, I don't post every day, but I try to post as much as possible because people like mushroom stuff, and if you can post like a good mushroom picture, it gets people really interested in mushrooms, and the more people we can get into mushrooms, the more people that we'll have that care about preserving the biodiversity on the planet.
Oh, absolutely. Someone, Thibaut Wagner, come to the Mycology Congress in Ecuador. I'm not familiar with that. Our local mushroom group in Ecuador, I think is what he said.
Well, sometimes they have like mushroom conferences in Ecuador where, it's kind of like an international mycology conference. I have not been to any of those. I went to one of the international mycology conferences in Mexico. But yeah, I would certainly like to go to things like that.
Absolutely. Me too. Do you know much? It seems like you spend a fair amount of time these days in Central and South America now. So, do you know much about the historic use of mushrooms and amongst the ancient cultures that might? Because just to give you an example, I really thought when I was growing mushrooms that when I first started getting into it, that I was going to be like, oh yeah, the Asian community in Knoxville is going to buy up all my mushrooms, blah 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 blah. It never really turned out like that. They I never really could make much headway in that market. But then all of a sudden I put like hashtag hongos in my post, and all of a sudden I'm blowing up like where I sell to tons of the Mexican, like we have a large Mexican community here, and they buy up mushrooms like crazy. And I remember asking them, I was like, I don't understand. I don't, when I think of Mexican cuisine and stuff, I don't really think mushrooms. And they're like, yeah, then you need to go to Mexico longer, basically. Apparently. Do you know anything about like where that comes from, that cultural vein for the love of mushrooms? Or
so in Mexico, most of the country of Mexico doesn't really care about mushrooms, but there is a part of the country that stretches from Mexico City to Oaxaca. And so that's like the state of Mexico, Puebla, Oaxaca. And in those areas, there's a strong tradition of mushrooms. And, it might be that those are the people that knew about the psilocybin mushrooms, so they started to love all mushrooms.
Interesting.
Or, maybe it's just kind of a coincidence that's where they love mushrooms. But yeah, if you go to like a market in Mexico City or Oaxaca, sometimes you'll be able to buy tons of different species of wild mushrooms there. Whereas if you go to the West Coast, like Jalisco, only the biologists are really into the mushrooms, and most people are just kind of scared of them and don't eat them. So, it really depends on where in Mexico people are from. But if they're from Puebla or something like that, they will definitely love wild mushrooms. So, the type of study you're thinking about is ethno-mycology, the human's relation to mushrooms. And I don't pay very much attention to ethno-mycology. I know a little bit about it because you just like overhear it. But, my focus is like going out and finding the mushrooms and stuff like that. And I don't really care how people use them.
You're more interested in the species hunting than the application.
Yeah, and there's a couple of reasons for that. One thing is that like I don't really care what people use them for because I don't like mushrooms because they're useful. I like mushrooms because they're cool. And I think you'll find like it's like the difference between like an herbalist or a botanist. Herbalists like plants for what they can do for people, whereas botanists like plants that even plants that don't do anything for people just because they love plants. And it's sort of the same thing. A lot of people start out wondering what these organisms can do for them, and then once they start taking a closer look at them, they they kind of start, getting into all of them. That's really common, especially people that look for magic mushrooms. But
I mean, it definitely happened for me.
There's certainly lots of indigenous people that have a lot of knowledge about mushrooms. They certainly talk about them in very different ways than we do, and their knowledge is focused on what the mushrooms can do for people. And I don't really feel like trying to take their knowledge and bringing it back. I don't really believe in medicinal mushrooms very much. And so I don't think there's really a lot that mushrooms can do for people. There's a couple exceptions to that, but for the most part, I think it's kind of like medicinal mushrooms don't really work. And I'm just not particularly interested in medicine in general.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I don't really. I have no idea what the indigenous people know about mushrooms, and I probably will never ask them.
Fair enough. I get it.
Yeah.
In
a lot of
ways,
times in Mexico, I'll go to the parts of Mexico where they've been using mushrooms for thousands of years, and I'll talk to the indigenous people. But basically, it's just me walking around teaching them about mushrooms. I'm not like trying to get their knowledge. I'm just trying to give them like a deeper appreciation for the mushrooms that they see every day. It's definitely cool to kind of blend like the modern scientific understanding of species and stuff with the ancient knowledge.
Absolutely. Yeah, for me, it kind of hit. I got into mushrooms in part because I started growing them at home, and then I started figuring out how kind of cool they were, and I was like, "Oh, this is super cool." This was just supposed to be so my family could eat another food source that I grew from home, because I was rabbits and ducks and chickens and a whole garden and a bunch of other stuff. And so I was like, "Oh, this just want good quality food for my family." Then I started getting into it while I was, going to school. And then really decided to start the business when I was got out of school and started working in aquaculture industry, and loved fish. Fish are still a big love of mine. I'm basically passionate about life in general, but when it came to the mushrooms, I was just like, man, this it's amazing to me how you can take a tiny little piece of tissue and it can grow into 1 million pounds of mushrooms if you treat it right. And then I started getting into the biology behind it. So now I am voraciously reading texts that are so dry that old Andrew would have thought these things are so super dry. But I just got mostly finished. I think I've got a few more pages left on the shiitake breeding program with it's genetics and breeding of edible mushrooms by Chang. I can't remember the first initials now, which turned out to be it was published back in the 90s. And then it was amazing to me reading into that. I was just like, man, it's crazy how much of this knowledge that I've kind of figured out in the cultivation aspect was already there. These guys had already figured that stuff out. And I was so super surprised at how much knowledge that, I thought I was figuring things out and these guys had already had it. But the biology behind it has become so overwhelmingly interesting to me that I've kind of become slightly obsessive about it. But
yeah, that's really cool. And one thing you can do with all those dry papers is kind of have ChatGPT summarize them and that sort of thing.
Yep.
And there's this crazy thing called Notebook LM. And so you can take a paper and load it into Notebook LM, and then it generates a podcast about it. And it's kind of scary how well it works. You have these two hosts, and the guy is kind of dopey but ask a lot of questions, and then the girl is really smart, and they'll take any paper and just discuss it in podcast format for 10 minutes. And they don't just read what's in the paper. They kind of Google it all and get all these additional insights about it. And so it makes it it's not dry at all. It's kind of funny, but you can take the taxonomy section of some paper and just feed that to them, and they'll make a 10-minute podcast on the taxonomy of Paneolus or some obscure thing that you've never heard of. It's kind of crazy.
That's hilarious. I'm going to look at that. Seeing as how I'm in the industry now. We got a couple of questions here. Has he collected anything from the Galapagos? I'm going to assume you have not.
No, I've never been out to the Galapagos. One reason
Galapagos
is that
trip, I want to know.
I don't really like. I don't really like to hire a tour guide. I like to go out by myself and not have someone watching over me. But if you go to the Galapagos, they require a tour guide. So you have to pay a babysitter, and they would definitely stop you from collecting things.
Gotcha.
So it'd be a cool thing. You could like apply for permits and a few $1,000s, and a few years later you could maybe get a permit to go do some research there. But also like tropical mushrooms are smaller and less diverse. I really like the stuff in the mountains. You get higher in elevation, you get more fungal diversity, and the mushrooms are larger. And so, and also it's just like, much more comfortable in temperature up in the mountains. And a lot of times the rains are a lot more reliable up at elevation because the clouds hit the mountains and drop all their moisture. So, usually I'm up at pretty high elevation. And so, island stuff, like if I'm on an island, I'll definitely look around, but it's, when you're really low elevation, it dries out so quickly that a lot of times you travel to some faraway place. Like a lot of people will go to Hawaii and not see a mushroom the whole time they're there. Whereas if you go to some of these like, really high elevation mountains, they're just everywhere for large parts of the year.
I mean, that's certainly true, especially like, here in the Smokies, it is insane. You get up into some of the old growth, and I have never seen so much fungus at any time of year, like other than like right now when there's snow on the ground. But you'll still find mushrooms just frozen. Like you'll find mushrooms encased in ice and stuff. It's just a lot harder to get up into the Smokies because they close down a lot of the roads through the wintertime and whatnot. But you said something and then just kept going like it wasn't a big deal, but it was kind of a big deal to me. So you're saying that in the tropics, mushrooms are actually less diverse than in the temperate ranges?
Yeah. So if you, and this is talking about the elevation. So like my friend Marco Gomez, when I met him, he was kind of like this college student guy, liked to party a lot. And, that was like 2010. And now he is like a mycology professor. And so he's really changed a lot. But one of the studies that he did was that they studied the diversity of fungi along elevation gradients. And what he found is that at sea level, the mushrooms are much less diverse. And then you go up in elevation and they get more and more diverse the higher in elevation you go. Up to about 1,500 to 2,000 meters in elevation is the highest diversity. And then above that, they start getting less diverse. So, Mexico, the volcanoes, the tops of the volcanoes are about 3,000 meters elevation, so like 10,000 feet. And when you go up to those really high elevation areas, the mushrooms are very large. You get a lot of porcini and chanterelles. So that's where you would go for edibles. I think large mushrooms do better in colder environments. And then you go down to sea level and the mushrooms are very small because it's so warm that they can dry out or rot very quickly. And so it's pretty much all white spored stuff that fruits quickly and dries out quickly. And then in the middle elevations is where you get all the most species diversity. So that's where you find all of the cordyceps and all the different species of psilocybe and the bioluminescent mushrooms that glow in the dark. All three of those things are most diverse in the middle elevations.
So like
the middle elevation
in the that'd be like where I'm at in the foothills, so to speak.
Yeah, the middle elevations, down in Latin America, they're cloud forests. So it's a kind of habitat that we don't have in the United States. But it's like, 3 or 4 p.m. every day, the clouds roll in. And it seems like there's always some mist around. So those are some of the most biodiverse ecosystems in the world. And, the mushrooms are just really, really cool around there.
Yeah. I mean, I know. So here, we find, for example, one year we found this reishi mushroom. I sent it to a bunch of people, like different samples. I kept growing it out because it had grown on, someone had cut down a persimmon tree, paved over it. This reishi mushroom burst through the pavement. So we cloned it. I sent it to a bunch of people. They couldn't, like through the spores and a bunch of other morphological traits, they couldn't really quite pin it down. So we sent it off for DNA testing. And the people who tested it were like, well, it's not really matching anything, so it may be a new species. We'll see. And then they checked another database. I don't remember which database it was, but and they had found that 4 other people from around the Knoxville area had sent this mushroom in, sent in the same species, and it turned out to be Ganoderma martinique, I think is how you would pronounce it. And at that time, I don't know if it's changed now, but they said that it had only been found on the island of Saint Martinique in the I guess it's the Caribbean, and here in the Knoxville area. I thought, well, that's kind of crazy, but we keep finding this where, like, here where we're at, we keep finding mushrooms that are found, and part of this may just be where we haven't done enough testing, biodiversity surveys and stuff is partly my guess, but also I don't know if it's where the Appalachian range is so diverse in geology and climate. Like every little cove has its own climate. You know, we've got, I think, more species of salamanders here than like anywhere else in the world would have, and but we never get like out west. I see people with like mountainside flushes of morel mushrooms. We never get that here. I never see anything like it, but we get a little bit of everything, and it's really interesting. Also, what you were talking about with the never drying out. Well, you may have just mentioned why my lake mushroom hunting is so much more effective than when I'm going out on the trails. Those islands out in the reservoirs don't ever dry out, so I end up getting a lot of my best mushroom hunting is on these islands in the lakes that surround us, that the TVA made lakes, and that's my guess is just where they just don't ever dry out, because even when it gets low, you know, the water, the lake's constantly putting off humidity. So
yeah, mushrooms definitely need humidity because the spores are ejected with the Buller's drop, which is a little drop of water that's transferred from the sterigmata to the spore, and transferring that drop makes the spore fly out. But if that drop of water dries out, then the mushrooms just can't eject the spores. So they're very much tied to rain. I just looked into the Ganoderma martinicense, and that's one that was discovered in 2010 from the island of Martinique.
Okay.
But now we call that Ganoderma subincrustatum, because in 1908, Merle published Ganoderma subincrustatum from Jamaica, and it turns out that's the same thing as Ganoderma martinicense.
Excellent.
So looking at iNaturalist, there's 8 observations of it that have been DNA sequenced. And you got a couple from Indiana, a couple from Virginia, and a couple from North Carolina. So it seems like it's probably all over the tropics and areas like that, but it also goes pretty far north. So
I knew you'd be the right person to tell me about that.
Yeah.
That is excellent. Okay, that's very cool. Like I've been waiting for like years to find someone who had some information on that. So that actually answers a lot of questions for me.
Yeah, and it was super easy to find that. I just searched iNaturalist, but I put on the URL line field DNA barcode ITS. So I'm only searching the observations that have a DNA sequence. Mm-hmm. And that way you're not looking at all the misidentifications and stuff. You're just looking at all of the ones that are actually have been DNA tested. Oh, there's a bunch in Puerto Rico too that I see now that I zoom out. That's cool. Probably Kurt Miller's work, and the British Virgin Islands. So
it's really kind of just a little bit more everywhere than what we originally thought.
Yeah, I mean, certainly probably everywhere from Puerto Rico to Indiana to like Washington, D.C., like anywhere in that triangle, I would expect to see it.
I love it. I'll continue to add it to my personal mythology, though.
Yeah.
D. Waller asks, what are you and Joey looking forward to most up in Ecuador? Even though the journey itself will be awesome, looking forward to is what they said. I hope you all are going to film.
Yeah, well, I don't do very much with film. I'll shoot some film occasionally, but what I really don't do is like film editing. So if there's anybody out there that wants to help me edit my film, that would be cool.
I mean, I'll help. I'll go ahead and volunteer for part of that.
Awesome. Yeah, I can just throw up all the raw footage on the web server, and we can see what you can make from it. But one thing I really like about going to these places with experts is just being, it's just so much more enriching just knowing what everything is. So we have Joey and also my friend Cruz Kalke, and they're both plant experts. Cruz kind of focuses on like ayahuasca type plants and Amazonian plants. And so with two botanists on the trip, we should be able to figure out what most of these plants are. And so it's really cool to kind of be able to instantly know what they are, and it'll be fun to try to get the best picture I can of some of these plants. And like there's plants everywhere, so it's a little bit like, someone like me just going there, I don't know what's rare and what's common, but these people will see things and they'll be like, "Oh my God, that's super rare," and then I will know to pull out the camera and tripod and lights and take a really good picture. Whereas if they weren't there, I would probably just pull out my cell phone and snap a cell phone picture, and I wouldn't figure out how cool it was until a few days later when I uploaded it to the iNaturalist and all the botanists started freaking out about it.
There you go. I love it. Xtop said, Alan currently has 30,146 observations on iNaturalist with 6,810 unique species. Is that true?
Yeah, that's true.
Oh gosh, Alan, you are obsessive, man. I love it. That's fantastic.
Like on a really good day, I might put like 100 new observations on iNaturalist.
Good Lord.
But that's just like everything I see with my cell phone. They're not like good things. But if I'm taking like good pictures of stuff and really spending all day, I'll get like 20 good observations with nice photos and collection to go with it.
Do you add your focus stacked images to iNaturalist?
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
One thing about iNaturalist is it reduces the resolution down to 2,000 pixels, and the focus stacked ones are like 6 by 8,000 pixels. So I upload all the focus stack stuff to iNaturalist and Mushroom Observer. And so if you go to my Mushroom Observer, you can just download the full resolution one. And so that's what I encourage people to do if they like want to print out like a billboard or a poster or like desktop background, something where they want a good quality photo. If you go to one of my iNaturalist observations and I have added good photos, then you'll see a Mushroom Observer link down in the observation fields. You can click on that and get the high resolution pictures.
Excellent. I love that. Sorry, I skipped something. Not many mushrooms in northern New Hampshire at the moment, is what they said. I would assume that's because it's winter. I do mushroom season in my area where like from spring to fall and with certain peak seasons, when we're like going out and bioprospecting, I'll be collecting and then receiving donations of just tons and tons of strains. And so we start just banking that into long-term storage. But I get behind. I really get behind. I basically culture the stuff, clean it up, and then it sits in plate for a little bit until I can further clean it up and get into slant. But this time of season, there's not very many mushrooms where I'm at either, just because it's cold and snowy and icy. But this is when I start catching up on all my lab work. So I'm kind of thankful for the off season. I start itching to get back out there too. But I definitely am appreciative right now because, oh my gosh, I quickly found out that once I started telling people about the mycologium, I ended up spending even more time in the lab than I was before, even though it was an excuse for me to get outdoors. But people are sending in so many samples that it's far more effective for me to receive samples from people and bank that than it is to go out on my own and get the few strains that I can drum up myself. So,
the off time is definitely nice. Right now it's pretty dry in California here, and so I have lots of mushroom stuff I'm working on. Like right here, this is about 1,000 bags of mushrooms, and so I'm writing.
Samantha's face. She thinks I'm an obsessive Alan.
Yeah, I'm like writing names and numbers and all of that, and just kind of organizing the herbarium and getting it all DNA barcoded and stuff like that.
How do you handle that kind of? So I'm going to ask you this, but you may think it's absurd because I was going to ask you how you handle the monotony of that, right? I mean, but like now that I think about it, if I handed Samantha a task like that and said you can have all the piece or music you want, she would probably find that like absolutely enthralling. So
soothing.
Yeah, Samantha literally, like, I love it when something's in order, but I hate putting things in order. So how do you approach this? Is that a drag on you, or is that something that, like, really
it's kind of cool because I collected all the mushrooms, so I haven't thought about them, but I'll like pull out a bag from 2016. I'll be like, oh, I remember that summer. I remember that place. I remember what I was doing when I found this thing, and it's kind of neat to be reminded of all those things. So, yeah, definitely kind of fun to go through them.
I can dig that. I didn't think about that aspect of it. For me, it's just my lab is a mess of just stacks of plates and plates and plates and plates, all waiting to be cultured into slant. So, or cultured into test, which for the test bags, because we actually converted our farm. We no longer operate a farm. We still sell to distributors, but it's basically anything that I breed that I'm testing, anything that is collected through the mycologium. We now have turned our commercial farm just into a pilot farm for strains. So I might initial test, make a grain master or spawn master, and then throw that into just 5 production bags. And then so we'll have an entire wall, each shelf a different species or strain, just kind of being tested. Mushrooms all get collected and go to the distributors to help pay for that program. But that's I still have, no matter how fast I seem to get the tests out, the stack just keeps growing in the lab. So I'm having a hard time keeping up. It's
yeah. Well, what you might be able to do is follow the cryogenics storage protocol, but just throw them in a regular freezer. Because you can still, like, -20 is still way better than, like, a fridge or room temperature. And and then when you get your -80, you can throw them in there. But I think stuff would last a really long time in just a normal freezer. With like glycerin. In the paper I saw recently, they put some perlite in there and just in a little cryo tube, and give the mycelium some surfaces to grab onto.
Okay. Yeah. Actually, now that you mentioned that, I mean, we took blue oyster. I don't know if it would work with everything the same way. I imagine it would, but we took, like, our King Blue strain, threw blocks in the freezer, and then pulled them out at, like, tested a batch at a week, one batch at 6 weeks, one batch at 6 months, and a batch at a year being frozen. And all of them worked. I mean, all of them revived just fine and grew just fine. And in fact, it seemed like the ones that were frozen for about 6 months came out with a vengeance in growth. So that is interesting. I'll look into that. So, in fact, somebody said something about Ed Grand. I missed it. Was talking about the water storage method. Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, you can just like kind of throw some agar chunks in distilled water, and they don't even need to be refrigerated. They can be room temperature, and I've had really good luck with that. I had a bunch that I tried the water storage method, and I put them in slants in the fridge, and all the slants died because the fridge got too cold, but all the water storage stuff worked just fine several years later. So I think it's a pretty good method, but probably the colder you can get it, the better. So, best thing to do is probably a 5% glycerol, and then throw it in the freezer, and glycerol keep it from getting actually frozen in the ice crystals. But the more you can keep things colder, the slower it's gonna degrade.
Dang. Okay, I'll look into that for sure. In fact, Ed Grand is right here watching. He said, "I'm going to ask for a GC/MS for Christmas."
Yeah, but what you really have to do is have the same culture stored a bunch of different ways. Do the same exact thing, but leave it at room temperature. Or put it in the regular freezer, or give it to a friend at a university that can throw it in -80. And 5 years later, try them all and see if there's any difference in how they fruit. And my guess is, like, you might not be able to see much difference, at least with oysters. Some things are so much more dependent, or so much more vulnerable to senescence than other things. But psilocybe campanensis was collected in the late 70s from near Tampa, Florida. And that's the same culture that's been going around. And we didn't have any new cultures until about 5 years ago. And finally, people started finding Tampanensis in the wild. And so we have all these new cultures of Tampanensis, but don't really notice any difference from these cultures that were inbred for 35 years versus something that was just collected from the wild. But maybe something else like cordyceps, you would notice a huge difference. So it's definitely species dependent.
Yeah, I've been told that about cordyceps that it senesces really quickly. I don't have, I've grown cordyceps maybe one time, so I don't, and that was a direct culture from somebody, and I just used it immediately. So I've never had to actually store it for any amount of time. I know that the sac fungi are a whole different ball game than the Basidiomycota. So,
yeah, I wonder if that's just a strategy so it doesn't kill all the bugs and kill off its food source. If it senesces really quick, just to kind of go a little bit, but then stop.
That makes sense. I like that. Just to keep it from burning out its whole food source. Someone said Alan may be a long shot, but do you have any insight on how much the Portuguese love mushrooms, specifically the South Lisbon area? Good knowledge on Mexico, by the way. I don't know anything much about the European pathways there.
Yeah, I've only been to Europe a couple times, and I did not go to Portugal, so I don't have any insight into that. But I know Maricel Patino. She was a member of the New York Mycological Society, and then she moved to Portugal. And she does amazing work with like taxonomy and microscopy, especially like crusts and dung mushrooms and stuff. So I would ask her.
Okay. Let's see. And someone said, "Hey, Alan, met you recently. Got to forage with you on the Washington coast with Aaron. Found my first Azurensis with you. When are you planning to come back to Washington? It'd be cool to go out again."
I'm usually in Washington like October.
October?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
But yeah,
I know mushroom season up there.
Ran into this cool guy in a campground up in the Washington coast, and yeah, it's definitely cool running into people who know what they're talking about when you don't expect.
Excellent. Yeah, it's funny how Samantha and I will be out somewhere in the woods and leaned over a mushroom. I'll be taking pictures, or I'll get my bag and tag stuff out where I'm like putting it in a Ziploc and just take photos of it and then write down the reference, stuff on the baggie. And we'll get people that'll stop. And sometimes it's people who are just like curious as to what we're doing. But then, we get to meet a lot of really cool people. We recently got to meet a guy who grew ferns and studied ferns for a really, really long time, built a big business on it and sold it out, and was talking to us about how he was breeding ferns from spore. Like, I don't know. It's kind of crazy how you get to just meet these people.
Really cool. And actually, I've heard that it's pretty easy to grow ferns from spores. You can just like take some spores and kind of throw it on some rock wool or something, and the ferns will just grow. It's pretty cool.
I'm gonna have to try that. I love ferns. Like Samantha and I are that's some of my favorite patch of forest when I get in there and to get to a really like ferny dark patch. So.
Oh yeah, ferns are awesome. And also, the fern spores look really cool under the microscope.
Really? Okay, you come. I just recently, because of you in part, really started getting more and more into microscopy. So, because I asked you, because I was like, man, I'm going to need a microtome or something like that to really get into making slides. And you were like, nope, I just slice it by hand really thin. So I shake, my hand shakes whenever I try to cut stuff. So Samantha's got really steady hands. So I had her cutting a Cinnabar bracket. And just cutting thin slices on that so we could look at it through the microscope, that kind of stuff. So now you've got me. I'm going to have to look at the fern spores.
Yeah. Almost nobody in mycology uses microtomes, and you can. I'm not sure why they don't. It might just be this kind of hard to encase mushrooms in wax and kind of stuff. I've seen a couple people get really amazing results with it, but you can also get really amazing results in much less time by hand. So, this is what every professional mycologist I see. They're just kind of going ahead and slicing stuff up just with a dissection scope.
Yeah, I mean that's Samantha was doing it without the dissection scope, but I guess we could just do it under our. I mean, I got an M scope.
Yeah, if you have one, you should use it because one of the main things that that affects what you see through your compound scope is which part of the mushroom you're using. So you have a dissection scope, you can be really precise about that. And then the other thing that I like to do a lot is you'll make like 30 cuts that are all as thin as possible, and then just take like 5 of the thinnest of those and mount them. And the dissection scope makes that kind of work real easy.
I believe that. And yeah, cutting from different places was something that I noticed on the Cinnabar in particular, because Samantha went through and she cut a bunch, just vertically through the mushroom and just slicing through the middle. But then she went to the pore surface and did a few slices horizontally through.
That was tough.
And I believe that was tough. She worked at it for a long time, and like Samantha's the kind of person you don't ask her to do something unless you want her to do it for a long time and do it well. But she sliced that thing up. And what was cool is after mounting it, I got the effect of being able to look down through the tube, which I had not done before. I had never thought to cut that. Number one, I haven't really cut polypores much anyways, but it was kind of neat to be able to do that and just like get I wanted to do some of the photostack photography. I got a trinocular scope after a while so that I can have the camera with the remote control so that I could hopefully do some focus stack shots through the microscope through the compound.
One thing that makes a huge difference is using a brand new razor blade. And so I will use a razor blade only about 10 times. And then after I've used it to make 10 cuts, I'll take it and throw it in my wallet and then just like use it, just like kind of retire it, use it out in the field. Like if I fly somewhere and I can't bring a knife or something, I always got razor blades in my wallet for that. But
you can take that through. That's fine. They don't care about that.
They might care if they saw it, but it's too small for them to see. So I always have razor blades in my wallet, and I've never had them find them.
Makes sense. Fair enough. I'll have to remember that trick because they took my wallet knife the last time. So.
Oh yeah. But, another trick is that if I'm standing in line at the airport and I have something I'm not supposed to have, and I'm like in the security line and I want to get through, I just take all of the electronics that I have, every wire, every power adapter, every battery, put it in one like small part of my backpack, and then just take the contraband and put it in the middle of that. That's why they make you take your laptop out of the bag, because they can't really see through thick electronics like that. But they don't make you take your power adapters and
your camera,
little things out like that. So if you just have like a knife or whatever it is that you shouldn't have, if you just put it in the middle of all of that, it gets through the x-rays no problem.
Smuggler's cast. I'll have to remember that next time. Somebody was asking here, Oz TV, I guess, about they've asked 2 or 3 times about coastal fungi. How does that work out? Is that much different than like the temperate tropic region, or I know when I went to South Carolina, I saw plenty of mushrooms once you got off the beach, but I definitely never saw any quite on the beach. But
yeah, I don't see much on the beaches, but certainly near the beach. A lot of times very humid air comes off of the ocean, and then it hits with the first mountain after the ocean is where a lot of that gets dropped. So, coastal areas are generally really good as long as you're not too close to the beach, although there are certain mushrooms that you only find on the beach. There's one that we were calling Satharella amorphola for a long time, but we keep sequencing it. It's actually a Paniolus. I think it might be Paniolus dunensis, but that's out there in the sand. And then there's a Lacaria. There's like a whole community of mushrooms that you only see in the sand. That stuff is pretty rare. And here in California, I do a lot of hunting on the coast. I live on the coast, but up in the mountains, like Yosemite area, everything is different. Every mushroom is different. Every plant is different. All the bugs, birds, everything is different up there in the mountains. And I'm pretty sure it's that way. Pretty much anywhere you go, is that the coast is going to be different.
Yeah, I can imagine. Brittany asked, what about mushrooms that are considered invasive? Before I moved here, southern New Hampshire, or NH, I'd never seen Asian beauty, red Dulomyces copelandii. It was discovered in 2009. Could it have always been here?
Yeah, that thing, it's kind of cool. It looks like a frozen waterfall, but people say it's an Asian invasive. I think they might be right. I think there's not like any old collections of it. I personally don't worry about invasive fungi very much.
Okay.
Because there are so many things that if you're looking for something to worry about, that definitely cause problems. Invasive fungi, you can definitely notice them spreading around the world and invading, but whether they cause problems or not is kind of debatable. And they certainly don't cause problems on the scale of the clear cutting, the human development of natural areas, so the climate change, all of that. So it seems like focusing on invasive mushrooms when there's actual problems that have or invasive plants that really do cause problems seems kind like maybe not the best thing to focus on.
Well, and is it possible?
It doesn't matter what I think of the invasive mushrooms, because the invasive mushrooms certainly are not going to listen to me.
Fair enough. And I'm not sure what you could even, like, we have a hard enough time with invasive plants that people are trying to get rid of. I can only imagine, and fauna. I can only imagine with you're trying to remove a fungus. Like, how do you even go about a program like that? Like, that would be so, yeah, you can't.
Anything you do just spreads it more.
Exactly. Yeah, the more you disturb it. In fact, these species that are, like the golden oyster is the one that I can think of the most that people call invasive. I don't know if it's actually invasive. My business partner found the first golden oyster we found in Tennessee last year, or no, the year before last, 2023. And then last year I found a golden oyster in the woods during the summer. And granted, both of them were within a couple of miles of the shop. So it's entirely possible maybe that my growing of golden oysters seeded that, I guess. I don't know what the possibility of that actually is. I don't know if anybody's done any studies on that kind of thing, but
that's definitely a Chinese species that has escaped into North America. I do not know whether it's causing harm or not. Some people think it's really bad and causing a lot of harm. I haven't seen that evidence.
It's filling the same niche that the regular oyster is. I see the same pleasing fungus beetles on it, the same flies attracted to it.
I mean, I'm not really sure how sad I should be if a native oyster gets outcompeted by a Chinese oyster, but I imagine not very sad because they probably fill the same niche, and also they probably grow alongside each other. People think that the golden oyster is going to push out a bunch of native species, but humans push out other native species all the freaking time. So I think we should concentrate on that rather than worrying about these Chinese species. But
I would agree
at the same time, I probably wouldn't grow that one in an area where it wasn't already around. Just just like maybe it does push out species. I have no idea. And so I probably would, just because it is so invasive, just for the same reason, like I wouldn't plant a lot of some really invasive species in my garden because it might escape and it might
you're not just a bunch of fire ant queens in your yard.
Yeah, it might take future humans hundreds of millions of hours of weeding to pull these weeds out of if it kind of escapes, and maybe I could save all of that just by not planting that. But so I have mixed feelings about it. But I haven't seen any evidence of the invasive mushrooms really being causing problems.
Is it possible that mushroom populations shift, kind of like the way we see like a forest matures? Is it possible that we also are seeing? I mean, obviously not with the golden oyster because it's pretty clear that one seems to have. I mean, we didn't see much of it in the wild before the 90s, and the 90s is whenever it became imported to the States, as far as I know. So, but like other mushrooms, is it possible that mushroom species just kind of mature out in waves in succession, the way like tree species and stuff do through a forest?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I've never thought about that before, but now that I do think about it, I think that's what's happening basically all the time. Is that you got succession of the species throughout all of the ecosystems, and a lot of times the something will shift, and like people will go out to their cubensis field, they'll be picking cubes all the time and they'll be getting a ton, and then they will say, oh man, the farmer started putting fungicide in his feed. But I don't think that that's true. I think they just stopped growing there for whatever reason. All the time. I don't think farmers really put fungicide in their feed in order to stop cubes from growing.
I've not heard of it. Maybe they bought some soybean that was treated with it or something like that. But even then, I don't know that it survives.
I'm not sure there's really anything you can put in feed that would stop mushrooms from growing, because the fungicide would break down after a while.
Absolutely. Well, what about, I'm sure you're familiar with the concept of the masked year, right? So like an oak tree will produce acorns for 5 or 6 years, and then the 7th year it'll produce a massive amount, and a bunch of them will do it. And it's almost like to overwhelm the population of squirrels and stuff that are eating the nuts. I wonder if mushrooms then can follow the same thing, where they have like a series of years that are just regular production, a mass year, then maybe a year of very little production. Like if they actually follow strategies.
They definitely do that, but I don't think that's the reason they do it, because whenever it rains, the forest is overwhelmed with mushrooms, so it it just kind of follows that. But it'll be like there'll be a really rare mushroom no one's seen for 20 years, and all of a sudden one year it's everywhere, even places hundreds of miles apart. It's like almost like they're all talking, but of course they're not, and nobody knows why that happens, but it definitely happens.
So you think that's more of an environmental cue rather than a evolutionary strategy?
I don't know what it is. I haven't really found patterns in the weather that would cause these things to happen, but maybe there are patterns that are more complicated than I can see. Or also mushrooms will have bad years. Like last year chanterelles were everywhere. This year they're like only a couple, and just that people don't really pay attention to mushrooms in a systematic way like a biologist would, where they establish study plots and do count things in there. But when people do stuff like this, they absolutely see all of those things.
Interesting. Oh man, you have got me so full of questions. Okay, here's another question, and I hope you don't mind me jumping around some.
No, it's fine.
Thank you. Going back to the golden oysters, if they're an escapee from cultivation, it leads me to think that all the golden oysters that we're finding are descended from a limited amount of genetic stock. Would that mean that the golden oysters that we're seeing in the wild here are either less genetically diverse than what we're seeing in grow rooms, or under commercial cultivation, or maybe not even less so, but no more so genetically diverse than?
They're probably not genetically diverse at all. They're probably all very, very similar genetically, and if you were to go to China and collect them in the wild, you would get a whole lot more genetic diversity.
Okay, so I know that they're native to, was it like northern China, Western Russia, northern Mongolia, I think is what I was reading. I know that we have a person that's donated to the Mycologium a few times. Like he donated a couple of Hericiums from Mongolia, and he lives out there. I totally wonder if I could go visit him and then collect some more diverse golden oyster genetics just from going to the wild. I also wonder how many cultures have actually been imported. So that would be different genetic waves that would have a potentiality for escaping. But so what about mutation? How quickly would they land on like North American shores and then start mutating into unique lines, having unique mutations and whatnot?
Well, I mean, it really depends on how you define mutation, because every generation is going to have some.
Mm-hmm.
But it takes usually thousands of years for fungi to really mutate in any meaningful way that you notice. Okay.
Interesting. What about the buildup? I was reading in some of the genetics books I was talking about with shiitake strains that were highly cultivated generation after generation and isolated. When they took these and tried to breed offspring from them, they found that they really had to cross from two different lines. Otherwise, they had what they called a buildup of lethals in it. So they had like poor spore germination, poor strain performance, a lot of strains that would just not act right. If we had a low amount of genetic diversity of golden oysters being invasive into the States, is it possible that they would have a buildup of lethals over time that would just burn the population out?
I think the fact that they're doing so well kind of speaks for itself and says that, no, I think they're able to evolve past that. Okay. Some things will definitely do that, especially in cultivation. But when it's out in the wild, you're getting all sorts of different mutations and different populations and everything. It's certainly possible that if you went to Asia and grabbed a bunch of golden oysters, brought them back, they would be more diverse and even stronger than they are now. So if I was going to grow golden oysters, a new strain, I would kind of try to keep them from try to keep them from escaping.
Yeah, I'm not looking to destroy the ecosystem. I'm just curious here.
Yeah, and who knows if it's really destroying the ecosystem? But
just your shirt comes in.
Where his shirt? What does that mean? Depende de. We depend on the species. Gotcha.
Yeah, it depends on the species. This is one of the shirts that they sell at the fungus fairs in Mexico.
Oh, cool.
They have really good shirts. In fact, all of my favorite shirts are from this guy. His name is Joel. And if you go to Instagram, it's Joel Bio Ilustracion. You can see all the different shirts. He's got a really awesome Psilocybe hugeshigeni shirt with the really acute nipple on the top. He's got molecular shirts. He's got 7 or 8 mushroom shirts that are just like the best mushroom shirts you've ever seen. They're all hand drawn. And he also has like shirts that are like tardigrades and snakes because he's like a biological illustrator. And so you can actually order them to the United States, and they take like 5 or 6 weeks to arrive, but they do arrive, and they're less expensive than cool T-shirts in this country, and they're really good. So people like mushroom shirts. They should definitely check out this guy's Instagram and order some because he's got
JOEL.
It's JOEL _ BIO _ ILUSTRACION.
Whoa. So you're going faster than I can type. So I got bio _
so it's Joel, JOEL _ BIO _ ILUSTRACION. So just illustration in Spanish. If you start typing it into Instagram, it'll come right up. But yeah, you scroll through there. He's got like the best shirts.
There you go. That's on the bottom.
I just wanted to get it on the bottom. I guess I need to add an @ to it.
Hey, you were talking about the insects and birds and the botanists and everything, and one of my favorite illustrators is Jada Finch Illustration, and like just every one of her boards, she's done stuff for Nat Geo and all sorts of different magazines and things. It's really, really neat. But this is the part that I love very much. Yeah,
Samantha wanted to be either a medical illustrator or a biology illustrator. I don't remember the actual.
There's something about hand-drawn illustrations. They just have so much more soul
than Peterson guides more than I like
than even a photograph.
Yeah.
There's a guy around here that teaches like biological illustration classes. His name is like John Muir Laws, and he was teaching a free illustration class. And I can't draw. My drawings are atrocious, but I wanted to meet him, so I went out to one of these classes. And everybody was drawing like birds and stuff, but I wanted to get his attention. So I drew a picture of his car, and I'm so bad at drawing that it came out like an angry refrigerator, and it was absolutely hilarious. And I showed it to him. He was like, "Oh my God." But then he saw me at the fungus fair a year later, and he gave me a free copy of his book because he remembered me from the class. So it worked.
Your drawing was so memorable. How could he forget? That's awesome. Yeah, there's so many super talented individuals out there, just like you, and just everyone, especially anyone who I think takes something that they have as an interest and then take that passion and make it into a usable art. Like some of my favorite art is things that are practical within your just general home or anything like that. And there's so many things on your side of things with the research, all that information, it comes to light and you can see all the ways that it can be applied. And I think that is just amazing. Andrew's back again.
And you're echoing for some reason.
Oh, am I echoing? Because I uh-oh.
Sounds fine over here.
Oh, I think I figured it out. Okay, cool. I didn't mean to interrupt. Keep going.
One more thing about the illustration and stuff is that, any mushroom that can be used as dye can also be like boiled down and concentrated and made into an ink. So I really like drawings that are made with natural dyes, and you can use the different pHs and different mordants to get a lot of different colors from the same mushroom. I think one thing that would be kind of cool is to load these dyes or inks into like an inkjet printer cartridge, and then you could print with natural mushroom ink. And a lot of them are very fluorescent, like the Phaeolus and Pisolithus and the Lathoria lichens, just like really light up under ultraviolet light. So you could make some really cool natural blacklight posters by doing that.
So speaking of, Andrew was talking about the cinnabar bracket earlier. I was reading into a little bit on it and how it kind of produced, I think it was vanillin as a byproduct, and it said something else about it. I'll have to go back and look at that research paper, but there was something in it that helped create a color fastness to the dyes, particularly blues, and I thought that was really, really cool.
That is super interesting, and I haven't heard about that, but it certainly makes sense that such a brightly colored mushroom would have chemicals in it to make the colors stick around.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I wonder, maybe I'll get that culture to Sydney. That was one thing at the Georgia Mushroom Festival that I really liked. Like, I accidentally saw Sydney's dye making instructional, and it was super cool. Like, that was
anything hang out with Sydney does is going to be super cool because he's just one of the most awesome people.
It's true. It really is true. I met him. I did not realize, because I only knew him through Facebook, and then we got to meet face to face, and I was really surprised. I did not realize he was, so much shorter than me, but
yeah.
But I will tell you,
that a lot. Like, know someone online for a long time, and then I see them in person, and they're like really little, and I'm like, oh my god, I had no idea.
Well, people, I'm a big guy, but I'm not like gigantic. I'm 6 foot flat. I am like 300 pounds, but I move around in the woods pretty good. So people are always surprised. They either think I'm way fatter than I am, or way taller than I am, or way smaller than I am. But it's, for some reason, the camera never gets it quite right. But yeah, like being able to trying to keep up with Sydney in the woods. I'm pretty good in the woods, but Sydney's he's fast little thing. Though I will say, he brought up the back, and he, when we were out there on that fluorescent walk, and he really, my boys, he really let them take to it. They took right to him, and he was carrying them around, showing them all these different things. So, which that particular walk, we didn't find very many mushrooms, but we did find a lot of, scorpions and things like that.
I always find something.
Oh yeah, always. That's Brody. Just to give you an idea, Brody was probably the one that took to it the most and took to Sydney the most. But Brody's really quiet, really likes his personal space, very introverted, but he's the kind of kid who will literally, he takes after Samantha that way. Samantha likes her personal space. But he ordered in this big box of string off Amazon. I'm like, what are you ordering all this string for? And then came this mesh mat. And the next thing I know, for like 4 days, he's sitting there tying, and he has made himself a ghillie suit, to where now I was like, oh my gosh, man, like, you put a camera in that kid's hands, and like, he's like, oh yeah, I can totally sneak up and take some pictures of stuff for you. So he'll go out and lay in the woods and just watch stuff and like let stuff walk right by him.
Yeah, I was I've been starting to look at birds just a little bit, and I think I need one of those for the birds because a lot of times they get scared away even when I'm kind of far away. And if I had like a ghillie suit or like some kind of blind or something, and just wait for them to come up, I can get some amazing shots.
I got a really nice. It's variable zoom lens. It's like 200 millimeter. Basically it's the kind of lens that you have to attach the tripod to the lens, not the camera. So it's heavy duty. I can look at people or porches or whatever from far away. Not that I do, but I can, and it looks like you're right on top of stuff. So I got that so I can get on the kayaks, and actually, because you get out there on the lake and you start hitting the shores and there's birds everywhere. But I went, this was when I was still in school. We did a in the field study. And it was just at the Knoxville Zoo. We got to go work with the elephants and a bunch of other stuff. But the professor brought one of her fellow professors with her. And Dr. I can't remember his name all of a sudden. But, he was blind. He was walking with the stick and had the glasses and stuff. So we got to talking, and I asked him what he was a doctor of. He was a doctor of ornithology. And I was like, how does someone who's blind work on birds? Because so much of what I feel like it happens with birds is visual. And he's like, well, you hear that right there? That's a such and such bird. And that right there, that's a such. And he apparently studies them entirely based on their sounds. And then he's got one of the world's largest library of bird sounds that he's collected. It's amazing to me all the ways people get to do this stuff. I never would have thought of studying birds just via sound, but it was super cool hanging out with him. So
yeah, that is super cool. And have you seen the app called Merlin?
No, I haven't.
So Merlin is an app that is free, and it identifies birds based on their sounds. And
that's cool.
Yeah, I tried it yesterday. I just turned it on and I was walking around, and after a while I took my phone out of my pocket and I had a list of all the birds that were around me.
No kidding. Just while you were walking around, you didn't even have to actively do it?
No, I just started recording it, threw it in the phone in my pocket, and walked around for a few minutes. You can even leave it on all day when you're hiking, and it'll give you a list of all the birds you've heard.
Oh, that's all so day. Cool. That is so super cool.
Yeah, check it out. You kind of download different language packs for different parts of the world. So when I go to South America, I'll download the Ecuador pack or the Colombia pack. But it actually works really good.
That's cleverly designed.
Well, and it amazes me how many every mushroom person I've ever met is totally just a naturalist at heart. It seems like for the most part. Which, by the way, your friend Joey, I love his channel, and I really, really, really want to meet him one day. He's actually one of people got lists of celebrities they want to meet. He's one of my celebrities I want to meet. So.
Yeah, Joey is one of the most hilarious people. I actually met him about 10 years ago. I was running the psilocybin booth at the Fungus Fair, and I brought a PCR machine, and I was doing DNA barcoding right there at the psilocybin booth. And he came up and asked if I could DNA barcode his cypress trees. And I'm like, yeah, sure. It's the same process. We just throw the cypress tree in instead of a little bit of mushroom. And so we started talking for that, but then I ended up moving into his house. So I lived in his house for a few years, and then he moved off to Texas.
Wow, I didn't know all that. I didn't know you had known him for that long.
Yeah, but he's a really fun person to travel with because he just has such a deep appreciation for the plants, and he knows all the plants, and he's really happy to explain a whole bunch of stuff, and then the geology stuff too.
I love the way he talks.
Really cool.
When you're watching him, he's like, that there's a fucking whatever, whatchamacallit. I'm just like, oh my gosh, man. And he's got that, I don't know what part of the world or part of the States that accent's from. Is that a Boston accent or Chicago? Or
he's from Chicago, but he turns up his accent a lot for the video. So you can always tell if he's recording a video if you hear the accent going real strong. In real life, he's got just a shadow of it.
Right, like the rest of us, I guess.
Yeah, it's definitely pretty funny.
Yeah, it's funny because I sometimes will turn the East Tennessee twang up a little bit, especially when I'm thinking about it. I won't be able to stop, but I don't know. I really, really appreciate his the way he does things. He's humorous, and I learn a lot watching his stuff. So hopefully hopefully one day that'll be someone I get to play around with. So
yeah, I think he's in like just across the Mexican border, like McAllen, Texas area, because he loves desert stuff. So he likes all that kind of stuff out there. But he's in Chile right now.
Oh man, this place I want to
looking
go
at
so bad.
stuff out there. Yeah.
Have you been to Chile?
No, I haven't. I'd love to go.
Yeah, that's one that I really want to hit. I really like. I've got friends that have gone down there. I don't know, a few years ago. It's actually funny. While they were gone, they discovered, people were down there drinking yerba mate. And at the same time, while they were gone, a hippie friend of mine got me on to yerba mate. So he came back and he's like, "Hey man, I found this really cool drink down there." And I'm like, "You mean yerba mate?" And he's like, what are you talking about? And I was like, "Yeah, I buy it from the store, whatever." And he's like, "I've literally brought back kilos of the stuff, thinking I wouldn't be able to get it in the States." So, but
yeah, and you can grow it too. I was growing it for a few years until the frost got it. You just got to take it inside in the coldest days of the year, but it grows pretty good. It's kind of cool. But you have that native one, an Ilex vomitorium. It's all over Florida and Texas and a lot of places, and that has caffeine too, and it's native.
Interesting.
I've grown an appetizing name.
No, it's not. It's not an appetizing name.
It doesn't really make you vomit, though.
Oh, it'll make you vomit?
They will not make you vomit.
They will not make you vomit. Gotcha. Let's see. I feel like I've got an echo over here. I grew the mate plant on our porch for probably 4 years, and it survived. Like, our winters here are pretty mild, but it would lose its leaves for part of the year, and then it would bounce back when the following spring. So I did have it growing for a while, but I think eventually we did have like a harsher winter than what we had the previous 4 years, and it finally got it, which sucks. But I was surprised at how, I had it in full sun and it did terribly. And then I brought it on our front porch where it was shaded by a silver maple, and it took off like crazy. So apparently it's okay in shade.
Yeah, well, I see it growing in the wild sometimes in Ecuador, and it's definitely kind of shaded over there.
Makes sense. Let's see.
Dappled.
Hendrix asks, have you ever found any unique cordyceps species when you weren't looking for them?
Oh my gosh, yeah, all the time. Usually, they're kind of little, sometimes really little. So usually what happens is I will sit down to photograph something, and then while I'm sitting there taking pictures, I'll notice them around. The cordyceps diversity in South America is extremely high. You can find, tons of different kinds. And the genetic diversity is extremely diverse too. Like there's
how would you bring some of that back?
What's that?
How would you bring some of that back? I mean, would you just with cordyceps, can you just spore print stuff and then send the spore print back, or?
I've never really tried to culture it.
Yeah.
If you wanted to bring it back legally,
would probably love it.
You have to fill out a whole lot of government paperwork.
Mm-hmm.
But I think you never really know if the spores of something like exotic like that are going to germinate. So right. I think it's best to clone it fresh, and then also spore print it. But stuff like Pluteus, it's very rare for a spore print to germinate, but it clones fresh just fine. And I've seen that too, and then some other I guess it was what was it, Ophiocordyceps, something or other. Somebody sent me samples and it just wouldn't grow. So definitely did diversify the methods there. Yeah,
that's turkey tail for me is such a hard one to clone sometimes, because sometimes you'll just get the thinnest mushrooms and they will never. It's so hard to get the cleanest tissue. Most of the time I can get a clean clone, but it's especially if you take it to bracket. But I found that pretty much because of turkey tail, I now always spore print and clone whenever I'm collecting wild stuff for cultivation. It just, even if I don't get a clean clone, at least I've got that spore print. And if the spore print doesn't really germinate, at least I've got that tissue clone to try to work. So
Yeah, and it's really nice to have the option of having the exact organism or something with more genetic diversity.
Yeah, absolutely. Thibaut says, contact Rosa Batallas in Ecuador, head of the mycology collection of the INABIO Institute. I'm not familiar with that.
Yeah, and that's really good advice. In fact, Rosa is coming on our trip with us, and so
nice.
yeah, I think I'm going to go there in a couple weeks and give a talk to her students at the INABIO University. And then we also like to hang out in the herbarium and identify some of the old collections there. But yeah, she's been really great, really supportive, super nice lady, and that's how we're able to do all of our collections is to work with her on getting all the paperwork done.
Okay, maybe if I come on this trip, or not the February trip, but the fall trip. You think I'll be able to film that and do that for the YouTube channel?
Yeah,
okay.
I'm certainly happy to be filmed, and
I mean, obviously, yeah, we wouldn't film anyway.
That would be a real cool thing is to show people some of the mushrooms in these far off places. Personally, I'm not very good at filming stuff, so I don't film nearly as much as I should. But yeah, I definitely encourage you to come and shoot as many videos, and hopefully Joey's going to shoot a whole bunch of videos of Ecuador stuff while we're down there too.
Okay, yeah. So that's what I'm planning. I'm planning on right now. I'm doing my rehabilitation of the lungs and everything, and then yeah, I'm planning on being ready to fly down there with you in the fall because you've got me.
Yeah,
you're talking about these cool people.
Yeah, there'll probably be Colombia in the Medellin area. And we went there this November, and there was a fungus fair there. And the fungus fair was super cool, really tiny, zero budget fungus fair. And people came from all over Colombia. So a lot of people that I had just known online for many years, I was able to hang out with. Huh. And those guys are so nice. They're just really, really nice people to spend time with. And, the ecosystems out there and everything is just really amazing too.
But from my understanding, it's largely, I mean, there's not a ton of exploration that's really been done with a lot of it compared to like North America or something like that, right?
Right, very little as far as like modern mycological exploration. Mm-hmm. Yeah, very little, and so it's really. We're also working with some professors at the university in Colombia to get the collection permits. So we're going to be able to collect mushrooms when we're there in Colombia, and then do DNA barcoding on all of them. So we've started to do a little bit of DNA barcoding on Ecuadorian stuff, and occasionally we'll see sequence matches from Costa Rica or Guyana, but most of the stuff is just completely novel DNA sequences that don't match anything in any database. So, being able to build up the DNA databases is like really key to understanding what really occurs there and what the biodiversity is actually like in these places.
That's super cool. Oh my gosh. Oh, real quick. I have forgotten to do this, and we're already almost 2.5 hours in. So I always give people a discount code when they watch the show. So, hey guys, our discount code for this week is DNA20. So DNA20, this is good until next Thursday. 20% off site-wide. That includes our mentorships, consultations, cultures, and extracts. So just for anybody out there, DNA20 is the code this week, and that will stack with any of the other codes you get. So if you've ordered from us before and you get the 15% return customer code, that will stack with the 20% code. So you can get 35% off. Sorry for the interruption, Alan. I just wanted to make sure I get that to people.
No, it's totally fine. And it's funny they got to watch us for a couple hours to get that, but that's a pretty good discount code, so it's probably worth it.
I mean, 20% off, especially if it's like a mentorship. I mean, I'll save them like $600 or something. So
most people are watching anyway.
Yeah, and that's I always do it randomly throughout the episode. Sorry, Samantha, go ahead.
I was gonna ask, do you guys use anything like Julius AI or anything like that to kind of help stack a lot of this data, or data, or however you say it?
No, and I have not figured out a good way to use AI for that kind of stuff. I'm not really an expert on AI. I like to use it like instead of Google to do searches, and I also like to use it to fix coding problems, find bugs in code and that kind of stuff. But I do not know how to use AI to analyze DNA data, and I bet there's some interesting things that could be done with it. I just haven't really figured out what I would want to do and then how to go ahead and do it. But if you have any ideas, I'd love to hear about them.
Okay.
Yeah, that Julius AI, Samantha actually got me on that one, and I love it. I haven't used it much, but I did use it to build me a Google Sheets database for all of my strains to track everything that's coming in and out. And because, I'll just use like voice to text. So I'll just voice to text, upload it to the AI. The AI makes all the changes to my database. And then anytime I want to go look at it, I go into Google Sheets and check it out. And it programmed it all. It tested it all to verify it would work. And then whenever I would do it, if I would tell it where it worked or it didn't, and I mean, within about 30 minutes, I had a database built that I then just had to tell it what I wanted to plug in. So I'd say like add culture name to the database, and then it would start asking me questions. Who collected it? Was it bred or bioprospected, et cetera? And then it would sort it for me. It's super cool, but Julius AI in particular is a bioinformatics AI. So it's built like, I don't even know what all you can do with it. You can literally ask it, hey, what all can I do with you? And it will tell you, a lot of that. But it's been super cool.
Sounds really cool. I did use it once. I downloaded a CSV file from iNaturalist with all of the observations that had DNA barcode data and had it generate a graph showing how many DNA barcodes got added per year. And you could see like in 2010 or so, people were like just starting to do it. And then it really took off like 2017, 2018. And now we're like way above that and just adding. Seems like every time I look at iNaturalist, there's 1,000 new DNA barcodes.
I love it. Oh man, I love it. I love to see. Like, I was so into open source stuff, like Linux and everything back in the earlier days, and then I had to get out of it just because I just didn't have the time to program or really work on any of that stuff. And then I get into it, and you start seeing like the more citizen science based stuff, which to me is just an offshoot of the open source culture. And at first, I don't know, it seemed kind of hokey because it just didn't seem like it was gaining much traction. And then to see it gain all this traction and get to be a legitimate source of data and tool set, like, I don't know, that kind of stuff really excites me. I get really, really, really excited by seeing the change.
For sure. And I definitely like open source code. I've been writing a good amount of it recently. And one thing that I wrote is a program where you give it an iNaturalist number and it spits out a really nice printable label that uses the API to grab like the location and who collected it, and if it has DNA data and the notes and a whole bunch of stuff. And then puts out a label with a QR code, and then you can like really quickly scan the QR code with your phone and it jumps to that observation. So it makes it super fast and easy to print out really professional looking labels just by having the iNaturalist number.
I like it. What's your preferred language?
So I like to write stuff in Python these days.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, it works pretty good. And it's up on GitHub, so if people want that, it's they can like download the code and run it. But I also put it online in a Flask application. So if people don't want to mess with the command line, they could just go to images.mushroomobserver.org/labels, and then you can just type in the iNaturalist observation to the web page, and it'll just make them all right online there.
Excellent. Thank you. Well, what is it called? So people, if I wanted to search for it on GitHub.
On GitHub, it is. It's like inat label py. Let me just look really quick. Yep, inat.label.py.
Inat.label p. Oh, not po pi. There we go. Like that right there. Like you're seeing at the bottom.
Let's see. I'm not seeing the chat.
Okay. I think I misspelled label. I typed the. There we go. It's LABEL, not There we go. INAT.LABEL.PI.
PY.
PY. Dang it, there I go again. All right, folks. This is the real one here. Here we go. There you go. That's the real one. You can go to GitHub and look that up to get Alan's code there for the label maker. Let's see, Gary is with us from Fresh from the Farm Fungi. Any input on freeze drying mycelium for long term? I've dabbled with this with hit or miss results. Maybe some insight. I don't know anything about freeze drying mycelium.
Yeah, there's a freeze dryer at one of the labs that I work in, and it was broken and I replaced the brain, but I haven't really tried it very much. So I don't know much about freeze drying either, but I'm sure that it's a really good idea and that it preserves the chemicals in mushrooms much better than conventional drying. So I think people should definitely do more freeze drying. Preserve potency and flavor and all that kind of stuff really well.
Interesting. I've not done much of the freeze drying. I've wondered how that works with. So I know like dehydrating at a certain temperature helps to break down the chitinous layer. At least that's what I've always heard. A little bit above 120, like around 125 degrees. But that should be a little bit, low enough to not destroy too much of the volatiles that you're wanting to get a lot of times. I don't know. Is there a big difference between heat drying and then the freeze drying, like as far as, I don't know, potency or anything?
Yes. You'll definitely, like my friends that run psilocybin testing laboratories, they say that the freeze dried stuff is always more potent than heat dried stuff.
Okay. So we're also going to probably make the assumption that with like lion's mane, the freeze dried lion's mane would be.
Yeah, because it's more flavorful too. So pretty much any molecule is going to get preserved better with that method. So I think that'll hold up with lion's mane and all sorts of different things. Or even fruits, like the freeze dried fruits taste much closer to fresh fruit than it's something you do in your dehydrator.
Would the freeze drying be as, I don't know, digestible as bioavailable? There we go. As the heat dried.
I imagine more so because it kind of like gets real powdery and breaks up real easy. So it'll probably be more bioavailable.
Okay.
But about the chitin, I think chitin doesn't break down until it gets to like 400 degrees or something, 400 degrees. So I'm not really sure what's happening. There's so many changes that happen to mushrooms when you heat them up, but and there's also hundreds of different molecules that people call chitin, and they're all different. But it's the standard, like people always say, oh, you got to cook mushrooms to break down the chitin so you don't get sick, and that's probably not true. It's probably other reasons that you would need to cook mushrooms, but it's complicated.
Yeah, I believe it. It's kind of like the whole thing about extract and potency of all that other stuff that we were talking about. It's all a bit complicated. So, oh man, Fungi of Florida said, "Good old mural, I guess, describes so many species." That's one of my favorite, like, of the mycologist. Like the read about was William Alfonso Mural. I don't know if you're familiar with him.
Yeah, he was definitely a character. He described a ton of things, and then he disappeared for like 40 years and turned up in a bar playing the piano, and then they got him back into it, and then he described a whole bunch more things.
Apparently, he had a fungarium in a dormitory stairwell at one point. Like they didn't have space for him, so he just put it right there. And I was like, man, he would sleep on the couches. And they would say the students would come and wake him up, take him to breakfast and stuff, because he was so obsessive. He, like, during mushroom season, he would not eat or like hardly care for himself. I love him.
Believe that, yeah.
It said that his wife barely saw him when it was mushroom season. Like she would hardly ever see him.
Don't you dare do that.
I'm not going to. I became obsessive about cultivation so I could stay with you and the kids.
Take me with you. Pass with you.
I assume it's black liquid. Is there a good way to sterilize without a pressure cooker?
Sterilize without a pressure cooker.
I don't really think so.
To sterilize, but that cold pasteurization certainly works good for a lot of people, like especially like wood chips and straw and stuff.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, for some of the bulk stuff, the cold will work. But I even then, I don't like. Make sure you wear the proper PPE for that, because we've had people come to us and they've done cold sterilization and they did it with their hands and they burned up their hands and stuff. So,
is that from microorganisms that were in there?
They did it from the lime, where they added so much lime, and they were handling the lime. So we have here local, the mines are mostly digging through limestone. And so they pull all that out and they dump it here in these. There's like 3 depots where they dump it. That they just dump it and then forget about it, and it erodes and it washes away. So you get these like canyons, these just lime canyons that are, you could. If I was standing on my own shoulders, I wouldn't be able to reach the top of some of these. And so you get these big lime yards or whatever. We go play in them, but we're really careful because that lime will dry your skin out. It will burn you. It could absolutely like almost scald you if you're not careful.
The plants growing out of that is insane.
It's weird. Oh man, Alan, it was one of the coolest experiences over the past few years. My grandfather used to take me there to buy lime for his driveway. And then they closed it up and just let it kind of go. So one year my friends and I go, and there's this little patch where somebody, like a flat land, once you got out of the canyons, where someone had tipped over a bucket, and around the bucket were little plants growing. And then 5 years later, a whole oasis in the middle of this lime plain has formed with little trees and grasslands of species I've never seen before. But they're all growing in this around this bucket. You can still go in there, and the bucket is still in the center of this mass. And it's developed a whole ecosystem, birds and all kinds of things. The swallows have now dug in the nearest patch. Swallows have like dug these massive colonies into the sides of the cliffs and stuff. It's super cool.
Yeah, I mean, plants definitely care a lot about pH.
Apparently. That's got to be some really, really, really hard. I don't even know. Like, I don't even know how they would be growing in that hardly. Would that be? It's just pure lime. Like, it's not soil.
Really
well, now there's soil building up. But, right. I guess so. I don't know. Maybe that's one thing I can interest Joey. Get him down here to look at. Send him some video or something.
I've noticed mushrooms care about pH a little bit too. I made a whole bunch of petri dishes at different pHs, and most of the fungi, about 75% of them, grew better in acidic agar, but about 25% grew better in basic agar.
Really? A lot of times, the ones that we're growing for cultivation, I've noticed, like oyster mushrooms, I put them to coffee, and I have to train them to where they'll actually rip through coffee. Versus like shiitake. Shiitake will just take to coffee like it's nothing.
Yeah, it depends entirely on the species, but coffee is kind of a terrible substrate for anything, really.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's just so plentiful that a lot of people want to grow on it. So I was like, well, screw it. I'll train. I've got 3 strains that I've trained to coffee that I'm about to release that people can get that are literally just the same, like mother of pearl, king blue, whatever strains I've got that are just adapted already to the coffee so people can get it. And there's no phase where you add it and then it's got to sit there forever before it finally takes off. But like I said, I definitely had to get it to where it would eat coffee, because it did not. Oyster does not like coffee from what I've seen, hardly at all. What mushrooms are most at threat due to climate change and ecological destruction?
Oh, geez. Most threat. Kind of hard. I mean, anything that's really uncommon and not and restricted to a very small area is going to be most at threat. There's one mushroom that's super cool that's called Lepiota luteophila, and it only grows in an area that's about 5 feet wide and 10 feet long and nowhere else in the world. So I would not be surprised if that one went extinct. But I got some really nice photos of it a couple years ago, and that thing is super slow on auger. So I wasn't able to make grain spawn and just throw it all over the place.
I was going to ask if anybody attempted to clone it with it being like, I've wondered about Europe where they've got Hericium on the red list and you can be fined for cloning it or messing with it. And I was wondering, wouldn't it make sense for us to clone it if it's endangered? Like this seems to be.
Yeah, absolutely. But putting fungi, making rules that you can't touch rare fungi or mess with rare fungi is just ridiculous. And it does make sense for rare plants, but with fungi, people probably just spread it around if they're going out there, like picking it or whatever. So it doesn't really make any sense.
Could you theoretically send insects and then maybe collect a few of those later? I don't know. To like spores, maybe.
You mean like release insects and then try to recapture them?
Yeah,
or like
the insects.
Or like put spores on the insects and then put them out there to spread it.
All of the above.
I don't know how
you could probably just like take some tinfoil or something and leave it overnight underneath it and then grab the tinfoil the next day.
Ooh, I like that.
I greatly admire conservation, but there are some of these things that there's hobbyists, people out there who have a love for these things that would absolutely keep it from going extinct. But I don't know. It's just, again, it's kind of one of those things that I have some feels about it.
D. Waller just said, I've played the Cardinals call off my porch on a Bluetooth speaker from the Merlin app, and some cardinals showed up within a few minutes. That is going to get some turkey hunters in trouble.
Hilarious.
If you're not a naturalist when you start learning about fungi, the fungi will almost certainly turn you into a naturalist.
Mm-hmm.
I would agree with that. It has made getting into mushrooms has made me more of a naturalist, even though I would consider myself one from the beginning. My grandfather and I, there was a Dr. Jane Smith that lived here. She was 94 years old. She worked on the code. She helped break the code against the Germans during World War II, and then helped break the code against the Japanese, and did a whole bunch of other stuff in her extensively full life. But they had just released bald eagles back here, and my grandfather had found the nest that they had made right on the lake. So we took her out there. Like a bunch of my earliest memories are just my grandfather being very, very naturalist oriented. So it kind of just came as a natural extension of my life. But
we have that canoe.
I do have that canoe that I grew up in. And then getting into mushrooms, like just legitimately, like I almost spaz out because there's so many different things I want to do. There's so little time to do them all. And some of them require equipment that I can't afford all of it at once. So it definitely will make you a naturalist, I think so. Ilex vomitoria is native to my area, and try to get you some berries and send them to you. There are a few females here. Would it be? I guess it would be from the berries that you would get the seed, wouldn't you?
Yeah. I've also heard with that one, like different times of the year, it has really different amounts of caffeine.
Interesting. That would be interesting to get into and look at. I've always wanted a caffeine source I could just like go out into my garden and collect and bring back. Someone just says firefly cordyceps. Does that mean anything to you?
I've never heard of cordyceps growing on fireflies, but would not surprise me to see some.
Okay. I've heard it's that for pretty much every insect that there is some sort of fungus that attacks it. I mean, is that a pretty generally true statement?
It's really hard to say, but probably.
Okay, I don't mean to paint you into a we don't know corner. Okay, that makes sense to me.
That's one thing I really like about mushrooms is that anytime anyone asks any question that starts with the word why, the answer is always, I don't know.
Yep. So like a lot of times people will always ask me questions and I'm like, the answer is almost always, it depends. When it comes to mushroom, it depends. It could be a lot of different things. Let's see. Well, I'm going to give this just a few more minutes, if you don't mind, and then we'll go ahead and end it because it's about a 3-hour conversation. I could talk to you all day about this stuff, so, but I'm sure you got things to do. Real quick, with random acts of fungi, feel free to just email me off the website, or you can just email me at monstercreekmushrooms@gmail.com if you want to trade cultures and donate some to the mycologium. For the mycologium, I trade strain for strain. So just in your email, when you tell me that you're sending me some wild samples or stuff that you've got cloned out, just let me know and tell me what you want off our website, and I'll get the syringes pulled and trade it out to you. Mac Militant says, what do you guys think about, oh my goodness, I can never say this. You've actually, you and I've talked about a couple of this genus, but I can't. Oudeman.
Audemanziella.
Okay, yeah, you got it. Say it again for me one more time, please.
I pronounce it Audemanziella.
Audemanziella. Okay. Mm-hmm. And then he's got the Raphanipes.
Let's see. That sounds like one of the ones that grows on the ground and has the long rooting stem. So
that's what I wondered if it was the taproot oud.
Yeah, I call those Audemanziella section radicate. Okay. Whereas the ones that grow directly on wood are Audemanziella section Audemanziella.
It's probably wood, because he says, what do you guys think about it, that species coming to the U.S. market and growers? I don't know much about it. I didn't know that it was coming.
I've actually seen this one in Berkeley Bowl. There's a store near me called Berkeley Bowl that has tons of crazy mushrooms, like about 30 different species of fresh mushrooms you can buy. And I've seen it and I've bought it there.
Really?
It's a crazy looking thing. They usually kind of the stem is real dark, and then they usually cut the bottom so it almost looks like a pencil or something. And they're crazy looking mushroom.
I believe I found one growing up here at Glenmore Mansion, right across the street.
Well, that would have been a different one, okay. A different Audemanziella from section radicate, because these are one of the Asian species.
Okay, gotcha. It definitely had a deep, I started pulling it, and that, I kept digging and digging and digging. I followed a deep taproot, and it was a strong taproot. I was really surprised.
Yeah, cool. It'd be nice if we could buy Raphanipes in more stores. I think more mushrooms in more stores generally a good thing.
I think so. I'm a big fan of diversity. I mean, that's what got me into the mushroom breeding in the first place. Was I wanted to see a large diversity of phenotypes. I saw the tomato farmer next to me, one species on his table, and 50 different wildly looking different tomatoes that look like different species. And I was growing 5 different species and having them on my table. And I was like, how can you get that one? Seeing the cubensis breeders breed and get out of a single species so many different phenotypes has just completely blown me away. I would like to see the same thing for oysters and other mushrooms.
So you could do that with any species of any living thing.
Oh yeah. Yeah, genetics are fun to play with. So, someone asked this. I don't know. Do you? This one asked, what was your favorite psilocybe mushroom to consume? I don't know if you are a major consumer of them or not. I've only had cubensis, so I don't know anything about anything else.
I'll usually eat them 3-4 times a year. I should eat them more often, but I'm just lazy. Combination of lazy and busy, I guess.
How do those two go together? Lazy and busy.
I think the best one is Psilocybe zapotecorum. So that's one that is found in southern Mexico, Central America, and South America, and grows in landslides. And it can be one of the largest psilocybes. I found some that are a foot tall.
Wow.
And also, currently the strongest wild psilocybe out of any of them. I found some in Veracruz, Mexico, that tested at about 3% alkaloids, whereas Psilocybe azurescens tested about 2% alkaloids.
Mm-hmm.
And they give a really good effect if you eat a good amount. It's kind of like a 4-hour DMT trip type thing, but they don't hurt my stomach nearly as much as cubes. So I think there's some kind of chemical in cubes that kind of gets people's stomach a little bit.
Yeah,
and it's better to, hopefully some of these other species will really catch on. I think pretty much anything is better than cubes. They're just so easy and fast to grow that people just kind of grow them because that's what they're used to. But really a lot of these other species are not any more difficult to grow. They're just a little bit slower. So like if you grow Zapotecorum at home, you have to wait like 5 hours instead of like you have to wait like 5 months instead
I
of
was about to say 5 hours. Hey, that sounds
yeah,
faster.
that'd be quick.
Okay.
But yeah, I think Zapotecorum is really good. Mexicana is really good. You know, just pretty much anything that's not a cube is very likely to be pretty good.
So cubes are kind of I would assume part of that's what people are used to, but also that's probably just what is available wildly. Like I wouldn't even know where to source anything else, but you know, you go to some of the spore dealers or whatever, and they might have a azurensis or wavy caps or something.
Yeah, you know, I don't know a whole lot about which vendors are the best and not, but I generally like to tell people to go to Sporeworks just because they do a lot of microscope work and a lot of genetic sequencing, and they've been around for a long time, and so they're actually studying the stuff more than somebody who's just kind of selling them.
That was who again?
Sporeworks.
Sporeworks. Yep. Okay. Yeah, they're from my area, so I've actually talked to them when I first got into mushrooms. You know, I met those guys.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, I think they've got a really cool little operation. Someone said sinensis. Oh my gosh, tongue died. Sinensis. Oh my gosh, I cannot say it. Help me out, Alan.
Could have been cyanescens.
Okay, I think it was cyanescens, but are my favorite. That's exactly what it is. Yeah. Oh my! I get tongue tied sometimes. I can't.
It could be cyanescens, or it could be Paniolus cyanescens. And interestingly, the two are not even closely related. Paniolus is very distant than almost everything else.
Is it just because of the cyan being the color?
It's bluing.
Okay, that's what I was thinking. So what about the Tampanensis? Like, is that the truffle producing one?
Yeah, so Tampanensis is named after Tampa, Florida.
Mm-hmm.
But they used to think it's really rare, but it's actually pretty common. It's pretty common around the Atlanta, Georgia area, and when they found it there, they named it Psilocybe atlantis. But Tampanensis was named first, so that's the older name that takes priority. And it turned up in South Carolina a couple of years back. Someone sent me a sample of what they thought was a Paniolus, and turns out that I sequenced it, and it was actually Tampanensis. And I think it's turned up in Texas and Mississippi, Louisiana, Alabama. So it's kind of all over the South. It's just a little small mushroom. So people don't notice it very much and don't pay a lot of attention to little mushrooms. But yeah, that's definitely a good one, though the mushrooms themselves are a lot more potent than the sclerotia.
Really? So the sclerotia were just grown because that was the legal form, I guess, for a little while, like in Europe or
in the Netherlands, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. It's legal in the Netherlands to grow the sclerotia.
It is still legal? Okay.
Yeah, all the smart shops there are full of sclerotia. They usually have a little fridge that just has like tons of different sclerotia, and they'll say there are all these different species and strains and stuff, but they're all Tampanensis.
Okay. Wasn't there a species? I think you and I talked about it one time, like a long time ago. So correct me if I'm wrong, but it was growing found exclusively on pine cones. Am I?
I see a bunch of like mycenas on pine cones and stuff. I don't very often see psilocybe on pine cones. I've seen it a couple of times, like psilocybe cyanescens growing out of a pine cone, or azurescens will do it, but it's not very common enough. You know, conifer is definitely not their preferred substrate.
Gotcha. And then when asked about that, you said pretty much anything other than cubensis is kind of the preferred. So,
like, really, Zapotecorum, I think, is the best. The best, yeah.
Well, I'll have to try that one day. But the Natalensis, did you say that was a pretty potent one, or that people like it better?
I haven't tried that one myself, but a lot of people have tried it and say it's quite a bit better than cubensis, which is surprising because it's so closely related to cubensis. But you know, it's separated by many, many thousands of years of evolution, and I think enough people have said that they really like the effects of the natalensis. And of course, when we say that, we're talking about Psilocybe ocratiocentrata, because the real natalensis is very difficult to get, though a couple people do have it, like Julian and Yoshi and probably Kyler. And, a few people have the real one. But I don't think you can buy it yet.
And then... what do you think about so number one, this is kind of a two-part question. Number one, what do you think about the at-home test kits for the potency and stuff? I went to the Oklahoma Mushroom Festival and someone gave a talk there on those kits, and I've never tried one or anything like that, but have you have any experience with those?
Yeah, I've tried them a bunch, and I think they generally work pretty well. I think the accuracy on those is somewhere around to within 10%. But the mushrooms vary so much. Like even two mushrooms next to each other in the same tub will vary a lot more than 10%. So they're generally accurate enough. And the people who developed those things, like the Miraculix kit, are really cool. It was Felix Blanc, who's one of the top psilocybin researchers in the world. And he's published a lot of really cool papers. And he's also just like a really nice guy, really helpful, very sharing with his knowledge and time and stuff. So
you said that was Phoenix?
Good people to support. And the kit is called Miraculix.
Miraculix.
Like Miraculix.
I was familiar with Doma Nunzio, I think was his name, but I'm not familiar with Phoenix. Okay.
So that's different than an at-home kit where you can just test them yourself. Because with Doma, you send them a sample.
Gotcha.
And HPLC is definitely more accurate. You can get better than 99% accuracy with an HPLC.
Gotcha. Okay. And then I lost the second part of my two-part question. My ADD kicked in. So you start talking, and I start like, oh my gosh, everything you talk about this gets me spinning off ideas. But the strain potency. I was going to ask, what are the different? They're alkaloids, right? That are the active part, like psilocybin and psilocin. What other active molecules? There we go.
Well, there's almost a dozen tryptamines that are found in the mushrooms, but a bunch of them are just in trace amounts. One of them that's present in relatively high amounts can be baeocystin, and most mushrooms have about 10 times more psilocybin than baeocystin, but one exception is liberty caps. So Psilocybe semilanceata can have as much baeocystin as psilocybin.
Interesting.
Yeah.
What effect does that have? Is that a different effect than psilocin?
Nobody really knows. Some people have tried baeocystin, but there's not any reliable experience reports. I know Paul Stamets ate a little bit, and some other people have eaten it, and they say they get some effects from it. I think it's a prodrug for psilocin or norpsilocin or something like that. But people definitely have to try more of these things, just like in pure form, and also try mixing the different alkaloids with each other to see what they do, like, what kind of synergy you have between the alkaloids that can be present in mushrooms. And then mushrooms have a lot of different chemicals in them. A few years back, Felix Blanc discovered the beta-carbolines present in some mushrooms. So some species like Psilocybe zepticorum have a reasonable amount of beta-carbolines, but in cubensis it's mostly in the mycelium. And the beta-carbolines are the chemicals from ayahuasca that cause the MAO to be inhibited and cause the tryptamines to be stronger and last longer. And then recently, just last year, we discovered a bunch of tryptamine in psilocybe, and nobody knows what effect. Sorry, not tryptamines, terpenes. So nobody knows what effect these terpenes have in the if any, but it probably similar to cannabis, that the terpenes affects some of the effects as well. And there's a bunch of different ones, even in just cubensis.
Okay. I normally don't get on and talk much about psilocybin just because I'm always very cautious about my channel. I mean, I'm sure you've seen mushroom channels get taken down and stuff before, but
all the time.
Oh yeah, but we're like 3 hours in, so usually the longer you go on YouTube, the safer it gets to talk about this stuff, which is why I bring it up towards the end. Someone mentioned the Amanita muscaria. That's another. I've seen Pantheri here. I don't know that I've ever seen muscaria in my local woods here.
I would expect you see Amanita persicina. In the southeast is the common kind of red to orange one, and then you've got a bunch of stuff in the Pantherina group. One of them is multisquamosa. I don't think you have the actual Amanita pantherina. That one doesn't occur.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
At all, but yeah, there's probably 50 species worldwide that have the ibotenic acid and muscimol in them.
What does that do? I've heard that it's very different. I've never tried it. I've never really looked into it much, but I've heard it's definitely not making you feel very much like a berserker, like a lot of people would say. So what is that like? Do you know anything about that?
It definitely does something. Usually what I'll do is I'll take the Amanita muscaria and just pick it fresh, slice it up, and saute it in butter until it's golden brown on all sides, and eat it. And it is one of the most delicious edible mushrooms that exist. Really? But if I have less than 6 bites, I don't notice any effect. If I have between 6 and 12 bites, I start to get real sleepy, and I feel like I drank a couple beers. The effect is a little bit more like GHB than it is like alcohol, but it's kind of definitely one of those GABA drugs that has, kind of feels like that. And then if you have a high dose of it, you'll have a really bad day. So if you're having a good day, you want to change it into a bad day, taking a high dose of Amanita muscaria is a sure way to do it.
Well, now I know how to have a worse day. I'll file that away.
No, thank you.
It can be medicinal for people that have insomnia and just can't fall asleep. And also a lot of people use it topically for like muscle pain and just absorb through the skin. It can be pretty medicinal. And also for anxiety, sort of like panic attacks and stuff like that. And various types of chronic pain as well. So,
interesting.
It's like probably like it's sort of like cannabis in that only a small percentage of the population has conditions that are treated by it. But, psilocybin is different in that a very large percentage of the population could benefit from psilocybin mushrooms, because we all have, minor depression or addiction or OCD issues, occasionally.
Especially in this modern day, I feel like a lot of us are living on just a certain higher stress level than what our forebears would have had.
Yeah, absolutely.
Different type.
Yeah, it's like a constant, just low level hum in the background sometimes. But what about and we'll wrap this up very, very, very soon if you're all right answering a couple more questions. I know that they say that we don't have, like here in the southeast, we don't get Ganoderma lucidum. Instead, I think it's pronounced Ganoderma curtsii.
Curtisii.
Say it again.
We have the double I. That's an EI sound.
Okay. So how do you say it again?
Curtisii.
Curtisii. Okay. So like kind of you're saying courtesy, but courtesy. Kind of. Is that? I've heard that one is the Ganoderma of the southeast. I mean, I know we find like Tsuge. Golly, the last spring I found so much, like 90 samples that I tried to clone, and maybe 10 of them actually took to agar. But as far as the rest of it goes, what is do you know what I've heard the species difference between lucidum and curtsii is like one small set of gene cluster, like a small gene cluster, or like a locus or something like that.
Yeah, they're pretty close. I just checked the sequence data, and lucidum is turned up in the wild, pretty common in one corner of Utah and also Los Angeles. So these are likely escaped from cultivation. And yeah, the curtisii is definitely all over the east and in Mexico as well. But But if I kind of wanted to see which ones are there, I can just go to iNaturalist and search for the DNA barcoded observations and draw a box around the southeast. And it looks like, let's see. Looks like you have 8 species of Ganoderma in the southeast.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. Most common is Flexillae. Second most common is Curtitii. You also have Lobatum, subincrustatum, which is the one that we used to call Martinicense. And then you have the real Aplanatum from Europe, and Ganoderma tsugae. Ganoderma zonatum is the one that grows on palms. And Ganoderma, it's Ganoderma iricae. I've never heard of it, but apparently it's really rare. There's only one of them from Florida.
Is that DNA? Is that backed up by DNA?
Yeah.
Okay.
I only search for the stuff backed up by DNA.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah. So, there's, it kind of looks like a hard little pom-pom on the root of a tree and the iNaturalist observation in Gainesville. But yeah, applied sequence by Matt Smith at that University of Florida there.
Oh, interesting. Very cool. Well, shoot, Alan, you are a wealth of knowledge. I could talk to you all day. Hopefully you'll, come back on again with us sometime. Is there anything else like you want to plug, like your Instagram or channel, or is there anything else that you'd like to do? I'll be able to clip it out and hopefully put it on Instagram as well.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I definitely post some good stuff on Instagram and Facebook and LinkedIn and all those things. So, occasionally Blue Sky and come on Mastodon now, but the main thing that needs to be plugged is probably the MycoBlitz. Mm-hmm. This is happening until the 26th, and you can send in up to 10 free samples for DNA barcoding. You just collect the mushroom, dry it, put it on iNaturalist, label it with the iNaturalist observation number, and drop it in the mail to Stephen Russell. And he also has free DNA sequencing that's unlimited for a lot of areas. And some of those, let's see, maybe I can even figure out where that is. But
I was going to say,
one of them is California.
I was thinking that part of it reached down into this area, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, well, he just opened up a bunch of new states the last few days.
Excellent.
Oh, there it is. I just went to mycota.com. So right now he's got California and Arizona, and Illinois, Florida, Alabama, Colorado, Wyoming, Idaho. I wish my geography is better because there's more states in here. Michigan is one of them. I know like New Brunswick, a bunch of Eastern Canada stuff. Anyway, if you just go to mycota.com and scroll down from the front page, you can see all the states that are eligible for free unlimited DNA barcoding. And then the whole world is eligible for free unlimited DNA barcoding during these MycoBlitz events. The current one, goes until January 26th.
Excellent. Okay. Well, I will definitely send in some samples. I've got plenty stacked up that I haven't been able to work with just yet. I'm hoping to have Josh McGinnis on here fairly soon. Is there with Everyman Bio? I'm not sure if you're familiar with him.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I love Josh. He came down here and we did some playing around in some marshes and caves and lime yards and etc. Is there anyone else that you could think of that you would like to see pushed a little bit that I can reach out to and see if we can't get some people to come on here and push their projects?
Yeah, well, Josh McGinnis is super cool. I've never met him in person, but the work he's doing is really cool and very different from stuff that other people are doing. So yeah, I would definitely watch that. Let's see. I think probably maybe Scott from the Ohio Mushroom DNA Lab would be a good person to talk to. Scott Ostini.
Excellent.
We could do a tag, like Alan tags so-and-so, and then we interview them, and then they tag so-and-so.
Well, that's what I'm hoping to do. Is I want to just churn through people. I want people to be like, this guy and this guy and this guy. And that way I get all the interesting people in the world to talk to, right?
Yeah.
Awesome. What about Julian from Imperial.
Oh yeah, Julian's awesome. That'd be a really good choice as well.
Natucci, okay, absolutely. Well, I know I asked people, which I'd already had you planned to ask, and like I said, you're the first of my heavy hitters to come on here. But I asked people, and you were one of the first people that was requested. So, and I was like, well, that's good because that aligns exactly with what I want. People are very interested in what you're doing. I appreciate the work that you're doing. I know that you do a lot of it for free. And I appreciate. I know part of it's because you enjoy it, but just know that there are people out there that appreciate it. And hopefully, like I said, we'll have you on again, Alan. Thank you so much. And if there's anything we can ever do for you, please let us know.
Thanks. It's really nice talking to you.
You too. Take it easy.
Wait.
I
was just gonna say before we go, if you guys want to check out Mycena Media on their YouTube channel, that would be awesome. Jump over there and give them a follow and a like and a subscribe.
Mycena Media, and then you're just Alan Rockefeller on Instagram, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Okay. Go follow him. He's got some beautiful, beautiful photos. So
yes,
Alan, thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Take it easy. All right, folks. Well, that was Alan. I hope you guys enjoyed that. I know I did. Definitely gushed a little, you know. We'll be here next week. I don't remember what next week's topic is, so I'll have to go look at that. But we'll post that hopefully tomorrow. I know that we have a couple of farm tours upcoming that people have sent us. One from Mongolia, which is very interesting. Maybe he might even send us a new one. I don't know. I'll have to talk to Jacob. But and then I'm not sure if we're going to do that yet or if we're going to have another guest on next week. So let me check my schedule. We'll get that posted. But thank you all so much for being with us. Thank you for making this possible. This is really cool to be able to just talk to people and have people watch me talk to people. So again, don't forget that discount code, guys, DNA20 to save 20% on your orders. We really appreciate everything that you purchase from us. We get it out to you as fast as we can. Feel free to email us at mossycreekmushrooms@gmail.com. Make sure to like this video. Please subscribe. Leave a comment when this is posted as a video. All that stuff helps us out. But most of all, just coming in and getting yourself some good genetics, some good extracts. That's the best way to support us entirely. And with that, keep spawning culture, y'all.